The banners of House Targaryen rippled crimson against the sky, as though dyed with the very blood that had been spilled on the banks of the Trident. Rhaegar stood in the aftermath of victory, the roar of the river beneath him, a reminder of the conflict that had nearly torn the realm apart. The swirl of dust and smoke caught in the late afternoon sun, and in that haze he caught sight of the bodies strewn along the shore. Too many, he thought. Far too many. Robert Baratheon, that behemoth of a warrior, had been felled at last, not by trickery nor by a coward's stroke, but in honest single combat. The fate of the rebellion hung on the point of a sword, and today that blade had belonged to the Crown Prince. He was no stranger to the taste of war, but he had never relished it. On this day, he could feel the heaviness in his limbs, the dull ache where Robert's hammer had struck him across the ribs. A bruise, certainly, but by the grace of the Seven, no bones were broken. Sweat stung at his brow, and he fought to catch his breath. No number of songs or honorable verses in a ballad could erase the macabre reality of a battlefield. Before him lay the swollen body of the fallen rebel leader, his thick neck bent at an unnatural angle. Blood still trickled from the corner of Robert's mouth, trailing down his beard, mixing with mud and river water. Rhaegar stared, uncertain of what he ought to feel. He could remember in perfect detail the final clash. Robert's warhammer descending like a comet, the thunderous ring as steel met steel, the reverberating shock that nearly shattered the bones of Rhaegar's arms, the furious swirl of his own blade in a precise arc, forging a path across Robert's torso. Even the memory of the heat of Robert's breath in that last moment lingered, the wild rage that smoldered in Baratheon eyes. But war had ended that swiftly. All around them, soldiers had frozen at the scene, a single heartbeat separating one fate from another. But that heartbeat was enough for Robert to fall with a wet thud, sword spinning from his grasp. All that training, all that prophecy burned into Rhaegar's mind by the illusions of destiny, had culminated in that single blow. When the swirl of adrenaline ebbed, Rhaegar realized that the rebel host was faltering, already scattering without their leader's rallying presence. The Targaryen loyalists, though battered, let out ragged cheers. Some men sank to their knees, overcome with exhaustion and the shock of having survived. Others knelt beside fallen friends, the numb heartbreak of victory settling into their bones. Rhaegar wished to offer solace, but he felt the crown pressing down on him, though it sat nowhere near his head. He turned from the sight of Robert's lifeless form and surveyed the chaos beyond. Footmen lay groaning in the field, begging for mercy or water. The stench of death and the iron tang of blood clogged his throat. Such was the price of upholding the monarchy. Such was the burden. He spied Sir Barristan Selmy approaching, his armor glinting with gore beneath the smoky sun. Barristan's face was ashen with grief and relief, intermingled. "Your Grace," he said, bowing stiffly, "it is done." Rhaegar wanted to tell him that nothing was done, that no war ended so simply on the bank of a river. But the King's Guard's relief cut deep into him. Yes, he had ended the rebellion, but at a cost. He could feel the cost in the silent weeping of the wind across the battlefield. Rhaegar heard the forlorn calls for the wounded. On both sides, men who had followed him or had followed Robert lay dying. The battered ones, too weak to stand, called out to the Seven, or to the old gods, or to the mother who birthed them. It was no victory scene. It was heartbreak. Rhaegar inhaled, tried to steady himself, and ordered his knights to extend mercy to any who surrendered, to bring them medical attention, to treat them with as much compassion as possible. This war had sparked from the kidnapping of Lyanna Stark, from the savage executions of Brandon and Rickard Stark, from the rumor that Rhaegar had stolen Ned Stark's sister away. He knew that stories had run rampant, had given birth to the fires of rebellion. Perhaps now was the moment to show that Targaryens were not all cut from the same cloth as the Mad King. He forced himself to walk forward, ignoring the bruises that throbbed at his side. Squires hurried about, collecting battered shields, picking up swords, arms weighed down by the detritus of war. Rhaegar's boots left dark footprints in the bloody mud as he stepped carefully around the dead, searching for any sign of Sir Arthur Dayne or Prince Lewin Martell. If they still lived, they would be among the wounded, or among the last standing. Sweat trickled down his spine beneath the battered armor. each step a reminder of how mortal he was. Today he had very nearly lost. One misstep against Robert's hammer, and the Targaryen dynasty would have crumbled with him on that field. But luck or fate, or some mixture of the two, had seen him survive. Ahead, he noticed the silver gleam of dawn, the sword of the morning, raised high in a tired salute. Sir Arthur Dayne, hair matted to his forehead, was alive. He knelt by a wounded knight, pressing a cloth to a grievous wound. Rhaegar felt a flicker of relief. The best of them still stood. Barristan was here. Arthur was here. Together, they had managed a victory that a year ago had seemed assured, and then only weeks ago seemed all but lost. He knelt beside Arthur and murmured, "How fares our friend?" The man on the ground moaned, eyes fluttering. Arthur shook his head grimly. "He's done for, unless the maesters arrive soon." Rhaegar pressed a hand to the wounded knight's forehead, feeling the clammy skin. "Do what you can," he said, though he knew how hollow that order might be. He then placed a gentle hand on Arthur's shoulder. "I'm grateful you yet live. We must gather what men we can. We cannot simply leave them to rot here." "Never." Arthur nodded and rose. "The men are forming lines, my prince. We'll set up a camp nearby, gather the wounded, and burn the dead before they begin to fester." Rhaegar found a shred of comfort in the man's calm. There was a man he trusted as a brother. It was Arthur Dayne. Rhaegar trudged onward, ignoring the churning in his stomach. At last, he came upon a small cluster of men kneeling in the mud, under the watch of Targaryen soldiers. Among them, he recognized the sigils of the North, the fierce white direwolf of House Stark. His mind jolted. Eddard Stark was missing from this group. That is what first sent a low tremor through his heart. If Eddard Stark was not here, then he might have fled. Or worse yet, he might be lying somewhere in the carnage, beyond all rescue. Rhaegar's memory flickered to that day at Harrenhal, years ago, when a younger Ned Stark had spoken softly, danced poorly, and exuded a quiet sense of honor. If he was dead, Rhaegar knew the realm would never see a man of such quiet dignity again. He scanned the defeated men, searching their faces for some glimmer of information. A knight of House Glover swallowed and said, "We yield, my prince. Spare us." Rhaegar recognized terror in their eyes. So many Northmen had marched on the false promise that Robert Baratheon would see justice done for the Starks. Now that he was gone, they feared the Targaryen wrath that Aerys had once promised. But Rhaegar was not his father. He would not take pleasure in the suffering of rebels. They were men who had followed their lords. Men who had taken up arms for what they believed was a righteous cause. He would not see them flayed or burned. "The crown accepts your surrender," Rhaegar said, voice heavy with weariness. "Any man who vows to do no further harm will be offered quarter. We have no desire for more bloodshed. The war is ended." He watched the relief seep into their faces. A few men openly wept. Behind them, Targaryen knights kept their hands firmly on sword hilts, uncertain, perhaps, whether Rhaegar's mercy was genuine. His father would have commanded them to burn these men. Rhaegar remembered all too well the madness in his father's eyes, the refusal to end the torment of Rickard Stark, the insane joy he took in punishing dissent. He hated the memory. But he was determined not to walk that same path. A hush began to descend over the battlefield as the sun dipped closer to the horizon. The wounded were moved, or if they were too far gone, put out of their misery with a swift end. Sorrow thickened the air like a pall of smoke, and yet one could feel that intangible stirring of the next chapter. The rebellion had died with Robert. Lord Jon Arryn would no doubt withdraw to the Eyrie or come to terms. The North was the question. Rhaegar prayed Eddard Stark yet lived. If not, the burden would fall to his brother, Benjen, or to the next in line. He moved through the throngs of tired soldiers. Horses whinnied, stamping the ground. Spooked by the smell of blood, pages scurried with water skins. Banners drooped with exhaustion. But he heard a call, faint and urgent, echoing across the churned mud. "Prince Rhaegar." The voice was familiar. He turned and saw a young soldier from House Dayne beckoning him. Rhaegar hurried over, ignoring the pain in his side, to where the man stood by a cluster of bodies. There, among the dead and dying, he saw Eddard Stark propped against a broken spear shaft. Ned looked pale as ash, caked in blood, his hair matted to his forehead. The soldier was pressing a wad of fabric to Ned's side, where a deep wound bled sluggishly. An arrow or a spear thrust, Rhaegar couldn't tell. He knelt, heart hammering. Ned's eyelids fluttered as if sensing the prince's presence. His breath came in shallow gasps. Rhaegar gently brushed the mud away from Ned's face, and for a moment, he could almost see the quiet, solemn boy from Harrenhal. "Ned," he murmured. "Can you hear me?" Ned's eyelids opened a sliver, revealing gray eyes clouded with pain. He rasped, "Is it over?" Rhaegar swallowed, nodding. Robert is dead. The rebellion ends." Ned exhaled and let his head tilt back against the spear shaft. There was no triumph in him, only sorrow. "Robert," he whispered. 7 hells. The breath rattled in his chest. So many died. Rhaegar steadied himself and looked to the soldier. "He needs a maester now. Bring him to the healer's tent." The soldier nodded, but Ned's hand shot out to grasp Rhaegar's wrist. Strength still lingered in that grip. Ned's voice was hoarse. "Rhaegar," he said, ignoring the title entirely. "My sister, where is she?" That question had haunted the realm. Lyanna Stark was the impetus for Robert's fury, for the rebellion that had consumed all corners of Westeros. Rhaegar closed his eyes. He remembered the tower hidden away, the secret that he had guarded. In that moment, the memory felt heavier than ever. "She is safe," he said softly, not knowing how much he dare reveal. "She is awaiting your presence if the gods see fit to spare you." Ned tried to speak again, but pain twisted his features, and he gasped. The soldier urged Rhaegar aside and helped raise the wounded Stark to his feet. Ned's groan tore at Rhaegar's heart. They carried him away, a stumbling half-walk, half-drag towards the improvised medical tents. Rhaegar followed briefly, but Sir Barristan intercepted him. "Your Grace," he said, voice gentle. "Let the healers see to him. There is still much to be done." Bendemasen. The field was being cleared. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in a bruised palette of red and purple. Rhaegar's gaze drifted across the river to the remains of the rebel host in ragged retreat. Those who had not fled were scattered or had laid down arms. The war might not be officially ended, but it was broken. Their champion had fallen. Even if Stannis Baratheon or Renly Baratheon tried to rally troops, it would not be the same. Robert had been their heartbeat. He turned to Barristan. "We must see to the wounded of the North and the Vale as well," he said. "We show no cruelty to them. I mean to heal this realm, not break it further." Barristan nodded gravely, relief flickering across his lined face. "We follow your command, my prince. Some of the lords loyal to you might protest, but you shall have the loyalty of many hearts for this mercy." Rhaegar let out a slow breath. He hoped so. The realm had hungered for a just king, a wise king. He had always believed that was his destiny, to bring about a better age. But the taste of blood in the air made that destiny feel uncertain, tarnished by war. Night fell slowly over the makeshift camps, the thick hush broken by the groans of injured men and the soft weeping of those who had lost comrades. Fires were lit to burn the dead. The flickering orange glow danced on the river's surface. Rhaegar stood a distance from the pyres, the smell of charred flesh making his stomach roil. He forced himself to bear witness. A king, he told himself, must not avert his eyes from the consequences of his decisions. The war had begun in part because he had spirited Lyanna Stark away. He had believed he was preserving her from a union she did not want. That in her, he had found something precious that the realm needed. But the realm had needed a simpler path than war. As the flames rose, so too did the hush of men reciting prayers to the Seven or to the old gods. Smoke curled into the starless sky. Rhaegar could see shapes of charred beams from the improvised funeral pyres. He could practically taste the bitterness in the air. His knights advised him to rest. But how could he rest? The future swirled with unknown outcomes. His father, the Mad King, still sat the Iron Throne in King's Landing, unless news of Rhaegar's victory might shift something in the old man's mind. He walked through the camp, acknowledging the men who bowed to him. A memory of Robert's savage smile flickered in his mind. Once, Robert had been a friend, or at least an amiable acquaintance. At the tourney of Harrenhal, they were both young. They had both had illusions of glory. Now that lay shattered in the Trident's waters. Rhaegar found himself wishing there had been another way. A dozen different forks in the road, any one of which might have avoided this bloodshed. He finally came upon the large pavilion where the healers worked feverishly. Torches lined the entrance. The air reeked of poultices and infection, of sweat and desperation. He grimaced but stepped inside. Rows of men lay on cots, groaning or lying unnaturally still. Maesters and their acolytes knelt beside each, cleaning wounds, stitching flesh, applying ointments to burns. Rhaegar scanned the rows until he spied Eddard Stark at the far end. A small, earnest maester with watery eyes hovered near him, pressing herbs and bandages to the wound that spanned Ned's ribs. Even from a distance, Rhaegar could see the flush of fever creeping up Ned's neck. He approached quietly. The maester looked up, startled, then inclined his head. "Your Grace," he said. "Lord Stark is in grave danger from infection. He's lost much blood." Rhaegar nodded somberly, stepping closer, the lamplight revealing the glossy sheen of sweat across Ned's brow. He stood there, uncertain what comfort he could offer. Then softly he spoke. "Ned." Ned's eyelids fluttered. "Rhaegar," he rasped, voice barely above a whisper. Rhaegar glanced at the maester. "Do what you can," he repeated. "If you need anything, I will see that you receive it." The maester offered a stiff bow. A good deal of rest and luck is what he truly needs. Rhaegar hovered, the flicker of the torchlight illuminating the shadows under Ned's eyes. There was a time when he had believed Ned was simply a quiet wolf, overshadowed by the brazen Robert. But Ned had proven to be a far more complex soul. If he died, the North would be inflamed once more. Another wave of vengeance, or a thirst for justice. Rhaegar felt that weight pressing down on him, reminding him that peace was not so easily won with a single sword stroke. The realm needed stability. The realm needed the North to trust the crown once again. After a long moment, Rhaegar placed a hand on Ned's forearm, as gentle as he could manage. "Rest, Lord Stark. Live for Lyanna's sake." Ned's eyes moved behind half-closed lids, but he had no words left. Rhaegar slipped away, letting the maester continue his work. He stepped out of the pavilion, breathing in the cool night air, leaning on a post as a wave of exhaustion rattled him. The bruise along his ribs flared in pain, and he placed a hand against it, grimacing. His squire approached, a boy of 15 with wide eyes. "My prince, forgive me, but your tent is ready. Will you take some rest?" Rhaegar could not deny that his body cried out for sleep, but he hesitated. So much needed doing. But the squire gently insisted, "You can do no more tonight." Rhaegar acknowledged the truth in those words. With a weary nod, he let himself be guided to the dark blue tent that had been erected for him some distance from the pyres, a place where he could find a semblance of stillness. Inside, the tent was lit by a single lantern, the soft glow flickering across a simple cot. Not the lavish bed he might have commanded as a prince, but it would do. Rhaegar sank onto the cot, wincing as the movement jostled his bruises. He took a long moment to unbuckle the battered pieces of his armor, letting each clang gently onto the ground. His arms felt as heavy as lead. He stared at the flickering lantern flame, remembering the dream he had long cherished. The prophecy of the prince that was promised. The union that would save the realm from darkness. Was he forging that path, or had he merely unleashed more chaos? He tried to ignore the swirl of questions and closed his eyes. Sleep came in a stumbling wave, broken by half-dreams of the trident, of Robert's hammer, of Ned Stark's pale face. It was a restless slumber. When dawn broke, a pale gray light seeped into the tent. Rhaegar stirred, every muscle stiff. He dressed in a fresh tunic, wincing at the bruises, and stepped out into the early morning hush. The battlefield was quieter now. The pyres had burned low through the night. The rows of injured had been tended as best as possible, or left to slip away. Rhaegar's knights were gathering near the river, their voices subdued. He found Sir Barristan, carefully brushing down his white cloak, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "The men are waiting on your word, my prince. If your orders remain the same, we will ride on to Harrenhal or to King's Landing." Rhaegar exhaled. "The realm must be secured. The best way to do that is to ensure my father yields to a new approach. I have no doubt his reaction to our victory will be complicated. However, I must see that the loyalists hold the roads and that the great houses kneel. But first, I will speak with Eddard Stark, if he can speak." "Bantiyan." Barristan offered a slight bow. "Very well. But rumor already spreads that you mean to broker peace with the North, to treat them leniently, to return Lady Lyanna to them. There are some, my prince, who believe this is weakness." Rhaegar heard the edge in Barristan's voice. He knew the man did not personally think it weakness, but was simply voicing the concerns of the more militant lords, those who had expected a severe crackdown upon the traitors. Rhaegar's jaw tightened. If it is weakness to show mercy, then so be it. This war was tragic enough. If we can avoid further bloodshed, I'll do whatever it takes. He left Barristan to see to the muster of troops and made his way back to the healers' tents. The day was brightening, though a veil of clouds promised rain later. The camp was stirring with a renewed sense of purpose. Men broke their fast with meager rations. Others unwrapped bandages, wincing at the sight of their wounds. A hush fell when Rhaegar passed, but not the hush of sullen resentment. He sensed something else. Relief, perhaps, that the fighting had ended. People bowed their heads in greeting, or made the sign of the seven. Rhaegar found it disconcerting. He had never been comfortable with unquestioning reverence. He stepped into the healer's pavilion. The smell of herbs, sweat, and blood was stronger than before. Several cots lay empty now, their former occupants having succumbed to the night. But in the far corner, Eddard Stark remained, propped up, eyes half-lidded. The little maester was mixing a fresh poultice. When Rhaegar approached, Ned's eyes flickered open a little wider. Pain had etched lines across his brow, and his skin was drawn and pale, but he was alive for the moment. Rhaegar knelt beside him. Ned's voice was weak. "You came." Rhaegar offered a faint smile. "I had to see if you would make it. The maester says infection lurks, but your fever did not worsen overnight." Ned nodded, each shallow breath a struggle. "I must get to my sister." "You say she is safe?" Rhaegar hesitated, then nodded. "She is at a tower in the mountains of Dorne, guarded by men I trust. But more than that, I do not wish to say here. Be assured she's been cared for and is in good health. But we must handle this matter with caution." Ned's eyes sparked with flickers of anger, or maybe fear. Was she forced? The question hung heavy, a dagger thrust straight to the heart of the matter. The entire realm believed Rhaegar had abducted and dishonored Lyanna Stark. "Dottie." Rhaegar inhaled, let the breath out slowly. "No, Dottie. She came willingly. I promise you that on my honor and hers. But the realm does not understand. Many believed it was a kidnapping. That is what spurred Robert's wrath. I do not deny I handled matters poorly. I believed I was doing the right thing, but I have cost countless lives." Ninimzar. Ned's brows drew together in a frown, but he said nothing. Eventually he managed, "Lyanna must come home. If what you say is true, we can find a path. But Robert," he swallowed. "Robert is gone." He said it as though still trying to comprehend the truth. "I saw him once, lying dead." There was a tremor in Ned's tone, a grief for a friend he had loved like a brother. Rhaegar lowered his head in respect. "He fought valiantly. I took no pleasure in it." Silence stretched between them. Then Ned's voice emerged again, rough with sorrow and fatigue. "Will you make a gift of his body to House Baratheon?" Rhaegar nodded. "Yes. I will ensure that he is delivered to Storm's End for proper rites. I want no more indignities." Ned let out a ragged breath. Perhaps some measure of relief. Rhaegar studied the man. There was still so much unspoken between them. The death of Ned's father and brother, burned by Aerys. The humiliation the Starks had endured. The secrets swirling around Lyanna.d. The North has every right to hate the crown, Rhaegar said quietly. My father committed grievous acts. Brandon Stark, your father Rickard, it was monstrous. Ned closed his eyes, as if pained by the memory. Justice, he murmured, though whether he sought it or accepted Rhaegar's apology was unclear. Still, Rhaegar pressed on. If the North is to rejoin the realm, if we are to have peace, we must find a new path. I will speak to my father. I hope to persuade him that the time for brutality is gone. I cannot promise how he will respond. Ned's gray eyes flickered open. You would risk his wrath? Rhaegar's lips twitched in a ghostly half-smile. I defeated the rebellion. I have strong support among those who respect me more than they fear my father. He will not find it easy to spurn me. And if he does, I must do what is necessary for the realm. Ned's expression was unreadable for a moment, but there was a flicker of something like respect. He gave a slight nod. We will see. Then exhaustion claimed him, and he sagged back, letting his eyes drift shut. Rhaegar gave a short instruction to the maester to do all possible, then left Ned to rest. Outside, the day was brightening. The men from the north who had been captured were now gathering under watch. They seemed subdued, uncertain of their fate. Rhaegar approached and addressed one of the older knights. I would ask that you send a message to Winterfell, or to whomever speaks for the North in Lord Stark's absence. Tell them that Eddard Stark is in our care, that we intend no harm, that we would sue for peace and reconciliation. He paused, meeting the knight's gaze. If any man doubts my word, let him come see for himself under truce. The old knight studied Rhaegar, searching for deceit. At length he bowed stiffly. I will deliver the message, my prince. The North has heard dark tales. But if you speak truly, perhaps we can avoid another bloodbath. With that done, Rhaegar had to deal with the rest of the realm. The men of the Vale who had fought under Jon Arryn were in retreat, presumably returning to the Eyrie to fortify. Rhaegar did not relish a siege in that mountain fastness. But perhaps once word spread that Robert was dead, and that Eddard Stark was being treated fairly, Jon Arryn would accept the situation. The Riverlands, too, had to be soothed. Lord Hoster Tully had married his daughters to Ned Stark and Jon Arryn, forging alliances with the rebels. But the Tullys might be convinced to yield if Ned lived and was not held prisoner, if peace was genuinely on the table. All of that was in Rhaegar's mind when, midday, Sir Arthur Dayne joined him. Dawn, the legendary sword, was slung across Arthur's back, and his usually composed face held a trace of tension. My prince, Arthur said, we have pressing matters from King's Landing. A raven arrived this morning. It is from your father. Rhaegar stiffened, stepping aside to read the sealed missive. The parchment carried the royal seal. He broke it open, scanning the lines. His father's words were spidery and wild, even on the page. They congratulated Rhaegar for his victory with one hand and demanded swift punishment of all rebels with the other. Then the last lines. An order for Rhaegar to march on the Vale and the North, to burn them into submission if they would not kneel immediately. He felt a surge of anger and dismay. The realm had just endured a bloody confrontation. Thousands were dead. The rebellion was done. And Aerys's first thought was more fire, more destruction. Rhaegar folded the letter carefully, a tremor in his hand. He wants me to continue the slaughter, he said, voice heavy with disgust. Arthur's jaw tightened. He does not speak for you. Rhaegar swallowed. No. What? He does not. I will not obey an order that plunges us further into war. We have a chance to heal this. I will not break it now. Nimnan. Arthur studied him, eyes full of concern. He may label you a traitor if you refuse. Rhaegar closed his eyes, remembering the father he had known as a small boy, before madness had sunk its claws too deeply into him. It was a faint memory, overshadowed by flames and screams. If he does, so be it. He will not find many to stand beside him now. Too many lords see me as the future of the crown. If we must, we will do this ourselves. Arthur bowed his head. Where you go, I follow. So it was decided. By the next day, Rhaegar had mustered his loyalists to prepare a measured march south, taking with them the wounded who could travel, and leaving the rest under watchful guard. A strong escort would carry Eddard Stark in a litter, that he might receive further care once they reached a place with better resources than a battlefield camp. Rhaegar intended to see that Ned returned to health, or at least to safety. If that meant confronting his father, so be it. As the host marched, the sky hung low and gray, the threat of rain dogging them. Soldiers marched in silence, leading wagons of injured men, some from the rebel side, some from the loyalist side. There was little cheer among them, but perhaps a shared relief that the major conflict was done. Rhaegar rode at the head, flanked by Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy. They spoke little, each man lost in his own thoughts. The crown prince wore no crown, but the men who beheld him saw the gravity in his posture. Over the rolling miles, scattered villages came into view. Some had been ravaged by the passage of armies. Farms lay trampled, fences broken. Peasants stood in doorways, fearful at first. Rhaegar ordered his men to leave them be, to offer payment if they needed supplies. A small kindness, but it was far more than they had expected from Targaryen soldiers in these last years of tyranny. Word began to spread along the roads that Rhaegar Targaryen was different. The host pressed on. Now and again, a raven would arrive from one lord or another, each bearing the same cautious inquiry. Would the prince truly show mercy? Were the rumors of punishment from the Mad King to be disregarded? Rhaegar penned replies by torchlight, writing in careful, certain words that there would be no more burning, no more horrors. Each letter weighed on him. He knew that he might be sowing seeds of outright rebellion against his father's authority, if the king insisted on a path of cruelty. But if it came to that, Rhaegar would not hesitate to stand between the realm and his father's madness. Along the road, Ned Stark's condition wavered. Sometimes he fell into feverish dreams, muttering of the Tower of Joy, of his sister's voice. Sometimes he roused enough to speak a few words with Rhaegar, quiet questions about what had truly happened with Lyanna. Rhaegar answered as best he could, but always with caution, wary of watchers. He told Ned that Lyanna had wanted freedom from a marriage arrangement that did not suit her, that she had come to him out of her own accord, that they had discovered a shared sense of purpose, some secret cord that tied them. He did not speak of prophecy or the threads of fate. That was too abstract to help a dying man. Instead, he said that he would ensure Ned saw her again, alive and well. Ned listened, pain etched in every line of his face, but there was a flicker of something like hope. Or maybe it was desperation. They traveled for days, the columns stretching across the King's Road, battered banners snapping overhead. At night, they made camp along the roadside. Rhaegar would see to the distribution of supplies, ensuring that the wounded from both sides were fed. Word spread among his men that the prince was forging a new approach, one that might mend the realm's fractures. Some of the men who had once been loyal to Robert only spat at the mention of Targaryen mercy. But others, especially the small folk, saw a glimpse of the peace they had prayed for. Each evening, Rhaegar would pause by Ned's makeshift litter, exchanging a few words if Ned was awake, or simply ensuring he was still breathing. The tension in the air was undeniable, though. The name, Mad King, hung in every conversation like a specter. The knowledge that Rhaegar was leading them to King's Landing, to a confrontation with the man who had demanded the heads of these rebels, threatened to weigh them all down. The nights were full of hushed talk, men around fires discussing what they would do if the king ordered them to kill the Stark once they arrived. Some dreaded the day they would walk through the gates of the capital, but Rhaegar remained resolute. At last, after many days of slow progress, the city's outline rose in the distance, the red keep perched atop the black walls. Smoke from countless chimneys shrouded the skyline. Rhaegar felt his heart tighten at the sight. This was his home, the seat of Targaryen power, a place that had become as dangerous as any battlefield. He could sense the swirl of politics behind those walls. Varys the Spider would have been at work, Grand Maester Pycelle, perhaps whispering to the king. Tywin Lannister, still at Casterly Rock, was no doubt waiting to see how the wind turned. Would he march on King's Landing in support of the king, or remain in his fortress, waiting for the best moment to strike. Sir Arthur reined in beside him. Our outriders report that the gates are open, but the king's loyal gold cloaks stand guard. They seem tense. Rhaegar nodded. They will be. I'm returning with an army that includes men who once bore arms against us. They may fear a coup. Arthur's eyes flicked to Rhaegar. Do we plan one? Rhaegar's lips pressed together in a firm line. We plan to secure peace. If my father tries to burn the city rather than yield, we will stop him. He remembered with a shudder the hidden caches of Wildfire Aerys had once threatened to ignite if the city fell to Tywin Lannister. The memory of that threat still hung in the corners of Rhaegar's mind. He turned in his saddle to address Ser Barristan. Keep the men in formation. We'll enter the city with a small escort. Let the rest set camp outside the walls. We do not want to provoke panic. Barristan nodded, though Rhaegar could see his wariness. They could only hope that the king would see reason in this approach. A short while later, they advanced on the city gates. The gold cloaks stood in stiff ranks, expressions guarded. Rhaegar rode at the fore, in regal but not ostentatious attire, his breastplate polished, his Targaryen sigil shining. Behind him was a litter carrying Eddard Stark, carefully hidden from direct gaze by canvas, flanked by knights sworn to Rhaegar. The columns of soldiers halted outside, raising little dust in the crisp air. Rhaegar dismounted, took a moment to dust off his gloves, and approached the gold cloak commander. The man saluted stiffly. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "The king awaits you in the Red Keep." His voice trembled slightly, as though he knew some ill omen hovered in the air. Rhaegar inclined his head. "Then let us not keep him waiting." And so they entered King's Landing. The streets were lined with anxious spectators, small folk peering at the returning prince who had gone to war. They saw not a conquering hero, but a solemn-faced man leading a procession of wounded. The hush was profound, broken only by the shuffle of boots and the occasional clank of armor. People whispered from behind doorways, trying to catch a glimpse. Rhaegar glanced about, wondering how many nights had these people spent in fear of the rebellion, or in fear of the king's possible wrath. At last, they arrived at the Red Keep, where the gates yawned open into the familiar courtyard of red stone. The retinue halted. Rhaegar signaled for the litter to be brought forward, and carefully, they conveyed Ned Stark inside, where maesters loyal to the crown hurried to take him into a side chamber. Rhaegar was not certain that was wise, but he had no choice if he wanted Ned to live. He ordered Sir Arthur to remain close, to ensure Ned's safety. Then Rhaegar walked alone to the throne room, where torches flickered along the tall columns. The vast space felt cold, despite the warm day outside. The Iron Throne towered at the far end, forged swords forming a jagged, spiked seat. And upon that seat, Rhaegar saw his father, King Aerys the Targaryen, hair unkempt, eyes glittering with a dangerous intensity. The lines of madness etched into his face had deepened since last Rhaegar stood before him. The king's beard was ragged, his fingernails caked with grime. He wore rich robes of red and black, but they hung oddly on his gaunt frame. A hush fell as Rhaegar approached, each step echoing. The Mad King leaned forward slightly, eyes darting from side to side. Courtiers stood at a careful distance, fear in their posture. At the foot of the throne, Rhaegar stopped and bowed. "Father, the war is ended. Robert Baratheon is dead. The rebels are broken." He kept his voice level, though his pulse thudded. Aerys's laugh was high and sharp, echoing in the hall. "Yes, yes, you have done well, my son. They will think twice before rising up again." His eyes narrowed, scanning Rhaegar's expression. "And yet, you arrive with half the rebels in tow, if rumor is to be believed, and I do not smell the stench of their burning corpses." He paused, lips twisting into something like a sneer. "Why have you not carried out my orders? Do you dare to defy your king?" Rhaegar straightened. The eyes of the court were on him. He drew a breath, forcing calm. "The realm is weary of war and bloodshed, father. The rebels have surrendered. There is no need for further destruction. We can rebuild. We can unify the realm again if we show mercy." Aerys rose from the throne with a rustle of robes, one hand gripping the jagged arm of twisted metal. He took a slow step forward, the torchlight glinting in his wild eyes. Mercy. Mercy for traitors who spat upon our name, for the wolves who tore at the flesh of dragons. You speak treason. His voice quavered, rising in pitch. Rhaegar felt his stomach clench. This was the moment. If Aerys insisted on more slaughter, if he tried to push the realm back into conflagration, Rhaegar would have to stand against him, and that might tear House Targaryen apart from within. He kept his gaze steady. No, father. It is not treason to prevent the kingdom from burning. It is not treason to spare lives that will serve the crown better alive than dead. He let the words hang. The hush in the throne room was suffocating. Aerys stared at him, chest rising and falling, fingers twitching. Then he gave another thin-lipped grin. So, you fancy yourself the wise king? Am I to step down for your sake, boy? Do you plan to supplant me? A ripple of alarm passed through the courtiers. Rhaegar met his father's gaze, refusing to look away. I plan no usurpation. I only desire to spare the realm more devastation. You remain the king, but heed me now. If you continue to call for the heads of those who have already knelt, you risk inciting another rebellion, one we cannot quell so easily. We have an opportunity to mend the realm. Let us take it. Lepim. For an instant, Rhaegar thought Aerys might order the Kingsguard to seize him, but the old man only let out a cackle, stepping back to slump against the throne. Begone, Aerys snarled, waving a bony hand. Go, do as you will. But if the realm burns for your softness, do not come crawling back to me. He erupted into a half-hysterical laugh. You will see. Mercy is a weakness. The traitors will bare their fangs again. And then I will have my fire. Let them trotten. With that, the king sagged into the throne, muttering incoherently. Rhaegar stood there, the tension crackling in the air. Slowly he bowed again, more out of formality than true respect. Then he turned and strode from the throne room. The courtiers parted for him like frightened birds whispering behind their hands. Rhaegar's mind reeled, but a grim relief bloomed in his chest. His father had not forced a direct confrontation yet. For the moment, Rhaegar could proceed with his plan of mercy. He hurried to find Arthur Dayne, to make sure that Ned Stark had not been spirited away to some dark cell. But as he left the throne room, he saw Varys, the master of whisperers, appear from the shadows, bowing with exaggerated grace. Your grace, Varys purred. A wise course you take, if I may say so. May the realm know peace. The man's soft hands fluttered as he offered a simpering smile. Rhaegar regarded him warily. Spread the word. The crown welcomes the kneeling lords back into the fold. There will be no mass reprisals. That is the will of the prince. Varys's eyes gleamed. Oh, I shall. It will please so many hearts to hear. Then he slipped away like a cat in the night. Rhaegar pressed on, finding Arthur in the corridor outside the maester's quarters. Arthur's expression was tense. Lord Stark is stable, but the king's men tried to interfere. I reminded them that you commanded his care. Rhaegar placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder gratefully. Thank you, my friend. I have spoken with my father. He has grudgingly allowed me to proceed. For now. Arthur nodded solemnly. Then we must move swiftly to make peace with the North. When Stark recovers, or if he recovers, that will help. But if the king stirs up trouble in the meantime... He let the thought dangle. Rhaegar understood. The game had only begun. Officially, the war was done. But the conflicts that brewed in the shadows, the alliances, the resentment from both sides, the distrust of the Mad King, these threatened to unravel everything. If Rhaegar hoped to keep the realm from plunging back into chaos, he had to show them that House Targaryen could be different, that they were not all tyrants and madmen. And he had to do it before Aerys's madness reached some new crescendo. That day he arranged for the city to receive the wounded from both sides. He personally oversaw provisions distributed in certain poorer districts, though he had to keep an honor guard around him at all times. There was no telling if some brazen rebel might still attempt to strike him down. Yet, as he rode through the cramped streets, he saw not hatred so much as desperation. The people just wanted the war to be over. He caught the glances of children peeking out from alleys, mothers gazing at him with anxious hope. They had heard the stories. The prince who sang songs, who loved his harp. The man who had ended a rebellion. Could he be the one to bring them peace? He tried to show them that it might be true. That night, in the great hall, he hosted a small feast for the returning loyalists. There was little cheer, for the memory of the battlefield was fresh. But Rhaegar made a speech proclaiming an end to the war and offering clemency. Some knights cheered half-heartedly. Others shifted uneasily, casting glances at the absent king, who had refused to attend the feast. Whispers spread. If the king was not present, did that mean disapproval? Or was Rhaegar truly taking the reins of power? Rhaegar let them whisper. Meanwhile, he found a moment to slip away to check on Ned Stark in the Maester's tower. The man lay in bed, eyes open, though heavily lidded with pain. A single torch burned on the wall, casting flickers of light across the narrow chamber. When Rhaegar entered, Ned managed a faint nod, though he said nothing at first. Rhaegar sank onto a stool by the bedside. "We're in King's Landing now," he murmured. "You're under my protection, though some might wish it otherwise." Ned exhaled slowly. "Thank you." His voice rasped. "My sister?" Rhaegar reached out, placing a light hand on Ned's wrist. "When you are strong enough to travel, I will arrange it. For now, do not fear." Ned closed his eyes. "Will the king let you do that?" Rhaegar did not immediately answer. Aerys's reaction to the whole truth about Lyanna was uncertain, but in a realm still reeling from war, the king might not even realize the significance. "I will do what must be done," Rhaegar finally said, and Ned seemed to accept that. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ned, forcing each word, said, "Robert was my friend. But he was not the only reason we rose. My father, my brother, Aerys." He swallowed, emotion warring with exhaustion. Rhaegar bowed his head. "I know. I cannot change what my father did, but I can change what happens now." Ned's eyes opened, a shadow of hope in their gray depths. "Then let us see if you can keep that promise, Prince Rhaegar." Rhaegar nodded, understanding the gravity in those words. He left Ned to rest, stepping out into the corridor of the Red Keep. 1,000 unknown perils lay ahead. With Robert gone, the alliance of the rebels might fracture, or they might galvanize under another banner. With Aerys on the throne, there was always the threat of wildfire in the cellars or assassins in the night. Even so, Rhaegar felt that the realm stood at a crossroads. He had won on the Trident, but the truest battle might be for the future of Westeros. And that battle, he realized, would require more than a sword. It would require the forging of trust. He glanced through a high window at the city below, lanterns twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there, ravens were carrying messages to the north, to the Vale, to the Stormlands. Houses would be deciding how to respond. Yield and trust the prince's mercy, or nurse old grudges. Part of him, the dreamer who once sang ballads of prophecy, believed that peace was possible. But the cynic in him, the part that had seen so many men die, doubted it would be so easy. Still, he breathed in, letting the night air fill his lungs. Lyanna had believed in him once. Perhaps she still did. And if the North could believe, if Ned Stark could believe, then maybe they could find a common road. He turned from the window, setting his mind to the next day, the next challenge. Word by word, step by step, the realm would see that there was another way forward. He would have to walk a narrow path between the madness of his father and the vengeance of the realm's wounded lords. But on that path, he carried the hope of uniting North and South, of forging a time of healing. In his mind, he heard the distant rush of the Trident's waters, the final echoes of Robert's defeat, and felt the weight of the crown that was not yet his. He prayed to the Seven, and perhaps to whatever old magic coursed in Lyanna's veins, that this time, the realm would not drown in blood, but find a fragile and precious peace. Inne Kantai. Rhaegar woke to a city still shrouded in a soft pre-dawn hush. The Red Keep's corridors were silent, except for the murmurs of a few guards, and the distant drip of water through some unseen channel in the walls. He lay in his chambers, rooms far more modest than the opulent suite reserved for the king, and stared at the play of pale light along the ceiling. Sleep had been fractured by dreams that slipped in and out of memory. Glimpses of the trident, of Robert's dead eyes, of Lyanna's face half lit by torchlight in a hidden tower. The final images had always been of his father, looming above him on the Iron Throne with a mad glint in his eyes, demanding more death. He rose with careful deliberation, every muscle still stiff from battle. The bruises from Robert's hammer blows remained a dark tapestry across his ribs. The maesters insisted he needed rest, but rest was a luxury. Even so, he took a moment at the window, gazing over the city's rooftops as the sky slowly began to warm with dawn. He remembered the day he first held a harp in his hands. The wonder of music in a world that often felt so brutal. For a moment he wished he could slip away. Go play a quiet tune by a fountain. Forget about war and crowns. But that was a child's dream. He dressed in a simple black tunic, with the three-headed dragon embroidered in silver thread at the collar, buckled on a sword belt, and slipped out into the corridor. At this hour, the courtiers were mostly abed. The guards at the door bowed stiffly, uncertain what to make of a prince who kept such early hours. Rhaegar passed them with a curt nod. His first destination was the maester's tower. He wanted to see if Ned Stark had improved. As he climbed the spiral stairs, he took care not to startle the novices dozing on their stools. Above, he found the small chamber where Ned lay, still pale as paper in the glow of a single lantern. The air reeked of old herbs, sweat, and the faint tang of healing poultices. A maester with watery eyes hovered over Ned, pressing a hand to the patient's brow. Rhaegar cleared his throat softly. Stepping inside, Ned heard him and half opened his eyes. His voice emerged as a weary rasp. "You're up early." Rhaegar offered a faint smile. "I've come to check on you." He moved closer, taking note of the flushed heat in Ned's cheeks. The man was a bit feverish, but he seemed more lucid than before. "How fare you this morning?" Ned's breath sounded labored, but he managed. "Better than I did yesterday. The pain has eased a little." The maester nodded, confirming this improvement. Yet the tension in his posture hinted that Ned's condition was still precarious. Infection could turn in a single day, and these corridors of the Red Keep had never felt like a place of healing. Rhaegar sank onto the edge of the stool by the bed, careful not to disturb the tray of bandages. "I'd have you carried out of this place if I thought it best," he said softly. "Somewhere more tranquil, less stifling. But I fear there is no safe haven yet." Ned winced as he shifted. "King's Landing is the last place I wish to be. But I'll trust your word that I'm safer here, under your eye, than I would be out in the open. The North is anxious for news. My people will wonder if I'm dead." Rhaegar studied his face a moment. "I've sent a messenger to Winterfell to let them know you yet live. But it's a long journey, and the roads are uncertain. Still, I do what I can." Ned closed his eyes, relief coursing through him. "Thank you. If they know I'm alive and in your care, they might not rush to any rash actions. My brother Benjen, he has a good heart. But the North does not forget what happened to our father and Brandon." A hush settled over them, punctuated by the drip of condensation down the tower walls. Rhaegar did not flinch from the reminder of the horrors inflicted by Aerys. Instead, he inclined his head. "I would not blame them for doubt. My father's acts were abominable." He paused. "I intend to keep you safe until you are well enough to go to her. To Lyanna." A faint light flickered in Ned's gaze. "She is well?" he asked again, as though it were the only question he could manage. Rhaegar nodded. "Gentler now. Yes, she's been restless from the letters I've received, angry at what has transpired, but safe. I promise you, Ned, I never meant to unleash such wrath upon this realm. If I could take back the suspicion and bloodshed, I would." Ned looked at him, a thousand unsaid things passing between them. At last, Ned only murmured, "We will see if peace can be salvaged. I hope so, for all our sakes." Then, exhausted, he let out a breath and shut his eyes again. Rhaegar rose quietly, giving the maester a last nod before slipping back out into the corridor. He had a meeting to attend with the small council. It was not a formal council, for Aerys had not summoned it. But the realm still needed governance, and many matters could not wait on the king's whims. Rhaegar traversed the halls, noticing how the guards shifted at his approach. The rumor must have spread by now that the king was displeased with his son's lenience. Some looked at Rhaegar with curiosity or outright confusion. Others appeared almost grateful, as though they sensed a shift in the winds. At length, he reached a small solar near the council chambers. Within, he found several key figures: Lord Carlton Chelsted, who served as Master of Coin, Grand Maester Pycelle, and the Master of Whisperers, Varys. A handful of lesser officials stood by, men who oversaw the city's day-to-day needs. They rose as Rhaegar entered, bowing with varying degrees of sincerity. He motioned for them to sit, then took a seat himself at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming at this hour," he began quietly. "We have matters of urgent importance. Chief among them is the distribution of supplies to the city. With the war ended, many refugees have gathered outside the walls. We must see they are fed, or we risk disorder. By now, body pebble." Lord Chelsted cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Grace. We have coin enough to purchase grain from the Reach, but House Tyrell has been slow to send its shipments. They were uncertain which side to favor in the war. Now that you have triumphed, they may relent." Rhaegar nodded. "See that a raven is sent to Highgarden. Stress that peace is upon us, and their shipments will be most welcome." Pycelle, his long white beard twitching, ventured to speak. "Prince Rhaegar, the king might see such direct negotiations as an overreach. Perhaps we should first consult." Rhaegar fixed him with a steady look. "I've spoken with my father," he said. "He has left the matter to me." Pycelle opened his mouth, then shut it, uncertain. Rhaegar knew Pycelle was a sycophant who had served the realm under Aerys for many years, never risking too bold a stance. Varys's soft voice slipped into the hush. "And what of the rebels, my prince? Word has spread that you intend them mercy, yet some lords remain unconvinced. Whispers have emerged from the Stormlands. Stannis Baratheon has locked the gates of Storm's End. He will not yield until he sees what fate awaits him under Targaryen rule." "Demdawenhat." Rhaegar sighed, leaning back. "I plan to send envoys. The Stormlands have lost their lord. Stannis is now the head of House Baratheon, or Renly, if Stannis does not claim it. Either way, I do not want more blood spilled. If they will yield, I will confirm their rights and titles. Robert's body should be sent there soon for burial. Let that be a gesture of respect to their fallen lord." Then Rhaegar. The men around the table exchanged glances. It was a bold move, some might say naive, to treat one's enemies with such courtesy. But Rhaegar saw no other path if he wished for unity. All eyes rested on him, awaiting further commands. He cleared his throat. "We must also mend relations with the North. Once Lord Stark recovers, we will discuss a formal peace. His father was murdered at the king's command. If the realm is to avoid another uprising, we must address that injustice. Any official statement from the crown must acknowledge the cruelty that was done." "Now send him his idol." Pycelle blanched, fingers trembling on the table. "You mean to condemn the king's own actions?" Rhaegar's gaze flicked to him. "I mean to call them grievous mistakes," he said, picking his words carefully. "We need not shame the throne, only right the wrongs. Perhaps restitution in gold, or favorable trade terms. Something to show the North that we do not dismiss their suffering." Silence gripped the room again. Eventually, Lord Chelsted offered a tentative nod. "Very well. I will see to drafting proposals. But you know well that the king might lash out at such talk." Rhaegar did not falter. "I will handle my father." The meeting continued in that vein, each matter weighed with caution. The city, bruised by war, needed direction. Rhaegar listened attentively, asked questions, delegated tasks. He might never wear the crown if his father clung to life and madness, but he could still act as if the realm depended on him, because, in truth, it did. By the time they concluded, the morning sun had risen fully, casting bright beams through the narrow windows. One by one, the council members bowed and departed, leaving Rhaegar alone with Varys, who lingered near the door with a polite smile. The silence pressed in. Rhaegar studied the master of whisperers. "You have more to say," he observed quietly. Varys gave a mincing bow, folding his hands over his voluminous sleeves. "Simply that I admire your determination, my prince. You are forging a new path, and for that, I am intrigued." Rhaegar had never fully trusted the man, but he recognized that Varys' loyalty was to the realm's stability, not to any single monarch. "If you can do anything to help these negotiations succeed, I would appreciate it," Rhaegar said. "I do not want hidden daggers emerging in the dark. Assure the lords that I seek no further bloodshed." Varys inclined his head, a sly light in his eyes. "Of course. My little birds will sing your praises far and wide." With that, he swept out, leaving Rhaegar to gather the scattered parchments from the table. He returned to his chambers only briefly, to collect a fresh cloak and a pair of riding gloves. For the first time in days, he intended to ride beyond the city walls. Not far, only to the encampment of loyalist soldiers who had marched back with him from the Trident. Many were now stationed just outside the Gate of the Gods, keeping uneasy watch in case some new threat arose. If he wanted them to remain loyal to him, not his father, he had to maintain a presence among them. So, he left the Red Keep on horseback, accompanied by a small retinue. Sir Barristan Selmy, Sir Arthur Dane, who had come from Ned Stark's side just for the morning, and a handful of guards. They passed through the city streets, where the small folk were beginning their day. Fishmongers carted their wares. Street urchins darted around. Ragged women trudged under heavy baskets. Rhaegar kept his eyes forward, but he noted how many turned to stare. Some called out timid blessings or curses under their breath. War had battered the city's spirit, and the presence of a Targaryen prince might be cause for fear or hope depending on who looked. At the city gates, the gold cloaks saluted. Rhaegar gave them a polite nod, passing on to the broad road beyond. Here the air was fresher, scented by distant fields. The loyalist camp sprawled across a gentle slope, rows of tents and hastily erected pavilions fluttering in the breeze. Rhaegar guided his horse along the rows, letting men get a glimpse of him. It was important that they see their prince was not shut away in the keep. These men had fought for him, shed blood at the Trident. Some had lost comrades. Rhaegar wanted them to feel that sacrifice was not forgotten. He dismounted near the largest pavilion, where several knights came to greet him. One was Lord Connington, John Connington, once his close friend, now gaunt from the rigors of war. Connington bowed, a flourish of red hair slipping over one brow. "Prince Rhaegar," he said, voice threaded with relief. "We've been waiting for word of what comes next." Rhaegar clasped his friend's shoulder. "I'm sorry for the delay. I've been dealing with matters in King's Landing. The king is difficult." Connington let out a wry breath. "Is that so surprising?" Rhaegar spared a weary smile. "No, Dadam. But it means I need you and the rest of our lords to remain patient. I intend to secure peace with the North and the Vale, and any other holdouts. This is no time to pick fights." "Nerin." Connington led him inside the pavilion, where a rough wooden table stood laden with maps, tankards, and scraps of parchment. A handful of other lords in battered armor or dusty cloaks rose as Rhaegar entered. He recognized Lords Mooton, Hayford, and a pair of lesser knights who looked exhausted. Outside, men clattered about, hauling crates or sharpening swords. Rhaegar removed his cloak and spread his hands, greeting them. "I know you're weary of living in tents. The war is done. We will soon disband some of these levies so they can return to their lands and families. But I ask for a bit more time. Not all rebels have formally knelt. We must ensure no strife flares up again." Next time, Lord Mooton, older and stooped, made a small grunt. "And what if your father demands more punishment? What if the king decides he wants half the North boiled alive? Will you defy him, my prince, or should we ready ourselves for a march on Winterfell?" There was a note of bitterness in his tone, as though he expected the worst. Rhaegar felt Arthur Dane's gaze flick to him, cautious. "I will not march on the North," Rhaegar said clearly. "My father can make demands, but he knows I hold the hearts of many in this host. We are not going to commit pointless atrocities." A small ripple of relief passed through the group. Lord Hayford dipped his head. "Then you have my loyalty still, Prince Rhaegar. I marched at your side because I believed you a just man. We do not serve the king so much as we serve the realm, and you are the realm's best hope." Rhaegar let that pronouncement settle. Some men nodded fervently. Others wore guarded expressions, uncertain if praising the prince over the king might lead to trouble if Aerys heard. But the fact that no one spoke against him gave Rhaegar confidence that he had their support. He spent some time discussing practical matters. The disposal of the war horses that could no longer fight, the medical supplies needed for the wounded, the question of coin for the common soldiers. Then, he made the rounds of the camp, pausing at small fires where men hunched over their breakfasts. They rose, startled that the crown prince himself would speak with them. Rhaegar asked how they fared, whether letters had been sent home. He heard stories of wives and children waiting. He tried to give each man a word of encouragement. It was near midday when he rode back toward the city. The sun shone brightly, glinting off the red roofs and city walls. By now the streets were crowded with hawkers, donkey carts, and passers-by. Rhaegar took a slightly winding route, letting the people see him. Some turned away, clearly recalling the king's tyranny. Others mustered a timid smile. He saw a young girl with a rag doll wave uncertainly, and he lifted a hand in response. For a fleeting instant, he remembered how it felt to dream of a gentler world. When he reached the Red Keep, the courtyard bustled with new arrivals. Ravens soared overhead, and stable boys scrambled to manage a line of horses bearing the livery of House Tully. Rhaegar's heart quickened. The Tullys had ties to Ned Stark. Catelyn Tully was Ned's wife by the betrothal agreement, if it had not been fully consummated prior to the war. Or was that Brandon's old betrothal? War had complicated so many arrangements. Still, the Tullys had allied with the rebels. Perhaps they had arrived to treat with him. He handed off his horse to a groom and made his way inside. In the grand entry hall, he found a gathering. Lord Hoster Tully himself, tall though a bit thick around the middle, his copper hair streaked with gray. Beside him stood his brother Brynden, the Blackfish, a stern-faced knight with sharp eyes. They wore traveling cloaks dusty from the road. A small retinue of Tully guards stood behind them, glancing about warily. At sight of Rhaegar, Lord Hoster inclined his head, though it was not a deep bow. "Prince Rhaegar, we have come to speak on matters of the realm." Rhaegar inclined his head in return. "I'm pleased you've come, Lord Hoster. We have much to discuss. Please, come with me to a more comfortable setting." He led them through the echoing corridors to a smaller audience chamber, one that was less imposing than the throne room and offered seats for guests. Guards were stationed discreetly at the walls. Rhaegar offered the Tullys refreshments, wine, bread, cheese, and took a seat opposite them. The Blackfish refused wine, but Hoster accepted a cup, sipping as though testing for poison. Once they were settled, Rhaegar decided to speak plainly. "You supported the rebellion, Lord Hoster. I know this war has been grievous for many, including your house. Robert Baratheon is dead, but Eddard Stark lives, though wounded. We must find a way to bring the Riverlands back into the realm's good grace." Hoster Tully set his wine aside, jaw tight. "I supported Ned Stark because we were to be bound by marriage. My daughter Catelyn was betrothed to Brandon Stark, and after Brandon's death, it fell to Ned. Then your father murdered both Brandon and his father, the Lord of Winterfell. If you expect me to kneel meekly without any sign of justice for House Stark, that is not possible." "Danter soon." The Blackfish, arms folded, gave a slight nod, as if to emphasize that point. Rhaegar let out a slow breath. "My father's acts were cruel. I do not deny it. But the realm cannot be served by another tide of blood. I have already offered an overture of peace to the north. Eddard Stark is under my protection until he recovers. I wish to see a formal reconciliation. Your daughter will be recognized as Lady of Winterfell, if Ned lives to hold that seat." "Mentee." Hoster frowned. "She is here in King's Landing?" Rhaegar shook his head. "No, my lord. She remains at River Run, to my knowledge. But once Ned has regained his strength, I will ensure you are all given a chance to gather, to confirm the marriage properly if that is your desire. For now, I asked that the Riverlands lay down their arms and acknowledge the crown. In return, I promise leniency. No further punishments. There. The Blackfish spoke up, his voice flinty. And what of the Mad King's wrath? He burned men alive once, he could do it again. Will you truly stand against him if he demands Tully blood? Rhaegar met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, I have sworn I will not allow such atrocities. My father's power has waned. The realm's loyalty rests in those who would keep it whole. If he tries to burn the Riverlands, he will find few to support him. He is not the entire monarchy. I am here. Another silence fell, heavy with the magnitude of that statement. Eventually, Hoster Tully let out a long breath. I have known the weight of old loyalties, but you speak sense, Prince. We do not want more death. My lands have suffered enough from armies trampling about. If Eddard Stark truly stands by your word, then perhaps we can find common ground. I will ride to River Run as soon as I may and counsel my people to lay down arms, provided you ensure no Targaryen host descends upon us in retribution. Rhaegar inclined his head. Agreed. I will command my forces to remain outside your lands, except for routine patrols to keep brigands at bay. We want peace, not conquest. And once Ned is well, you may speak with him yourself. I do not hold him prisoner. If he chooses to confirm that we are forging a better way, perhaps your banners will follow. Now, the Blackfish eyed him for a moment longer, then gave a curt nod. We shall see how this new Targaryen age takes shape. Rhaegar allowed a faint smile. Thank you. In the meantime, my lords, you are welcome to stay as my guests if you wish. Or if you prefer, I will not detain you. I ask only that you do not provoke my father. For now, your presence here might rouse his paranoia. Nah. Hoster Tully nodded thoughtfully. We'll stay one night, then depart at dawn. I would see Ned if possible. Rhaegar stood, gesturing for them to follow. He is under the maester's care, but yes, you may see him. Come, I'll lead you. They left the audience chamber together, climbing the winding steps to the tower chamber. Rhaegar told the Tullys, in hushed tones, of Ned's injuries, how close he'd come to dying on the trident, how the arrow or spear had nearly taken his life. He spoke of the fever and the slow improvement. Hoster listened, an uneasy look on his face, as though imagining his daughter's husband lying near death in the fortress of his once enemy. When they reached the chamber, Rhaegar motioned them inside. Ned lay propped on pillows, his eyes half-lidded, sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked up as the Tullys entered, and a ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. Hoster, Brynden, he rasped. The Blackfish knelt by the bedside, clasping Ned's hand. Lord Hoster lingered behind, relief and grief warring on his face. Rhaegar stood back, letting them speak softly. He heard murmurs, questions about how Ned had fared, whether he suffered. Ned assured them, in words that came haltingly, that the prince had not mistreated him, that all he wanted now was to recover, so he could return to the north. The Tullys exchanged glances. Perhaps they were surprised to hear no condemnation for Rhaegar. Perhaps they wondered what strange bond had formed between the wolf and the dragon in the aftermath of Robert's fall. After a few moments, Hoster clasped Ned's shoulder gently and said, "We'll do what we can to keep the Riverlands from further harm. But rest, Ned. You must live through this." Ned closed his eyes, nodding. Then he managed, "Thank you for coming." They left him to rest, stepping back into the corridor. Hoster Tully gazed at Rhaegar with something like acceptance. "If Ned trusts that you mean well, that is enough for me, at least for now. But be warned, Prince, the realm watches every step you take. If you falter, if your father's madness flares again, if you cannot stop him, we will protect our own." Rhaegar understood the veiled warning. "I will do my utmost. You have my word." The Tullys departed, their retinue trailing behind. Rhaegar lingered outside Ned's chamber. Arthur Dayne stood guard there once more, silent and composed. Rhaegar exchanged a meaningful glance with him, some unspoken relief passing between them. Each day that another great house made overtures of peace, was a day they drew closer to stabilizing Westeros. But his father's shadow loomed still, a threat that could unravel everything in a moment. That evening, Rhaegar convened a brief gathering with Ser Barristan, Arthur Dayne, and a few trusted knights in a secluded garden behind the Red Keep. The sun was setting, the sky tinged with gold and purple. The fragrance of late-blooming roses lingered in the air. A handful of guards patrolled, but no one else was near. It was a sanctuary of sorts, away from prying ears. Rhaegar explained the developments. The Tully visit, their cautious willingness to accept peace, Ned's slow recovery. He spoke too of Stannis at Storm's End, how he might need an envoy to reassure him. One of the knights frowned. Stannis is stubborn, and with Robert gone, he may feel the duty to avenge him. Rhaegar sighed. Yes, but I do not wish to fight him. I want to invite him to King's Landing and hold a formal ceremony to acknowledge him as Lord of the Stormlands. If he refuses, we may have to blockade him or risk open conflict. But let us try words first. Ned. Barristan nodded. I will go, if you wish it. Stannis respects straightforward men. I can speak honestly of the Trident, of Robert's final moments. Rhaegar inclined his head. That might be best. If you're willing, Ser Barristan, depart in the morning with a small escort. Let Stannis see we do not come in force. Arthur Dayne looked uneasy, but he said nothing. Rhaegar glanced at him. What say you, Arthur? A slight furrow marred the dawn-bright knight's brow. It is wise, he allowed. But I worry about the king's reaction should he learn we are sending out envoys to treat with men who rose against him. He might see it as a betrayal. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly, the tension knotting in his shoulders. He knows. I told him plainly I intend to secure peace. He gave me leave, in his twisted way. But yes, there is a risk. Still, it must be done. They all understood. The shadow of Ares hung over them like a coiled snake, hissing in the darkness. At any moment, he could strike. But they had come too far to turn back. The war was over, and Rhaegar would not let the king's madness reignite it. After they parted, Rhaegar remained in the garden, pacing among the hedges, the smooth pebbles crunching underfoot. He felt the weight of responsibility more acutely each day. If he failed, war would erupt again, or House Targaryen would shatter from within. If he succeeded, perhaps the realm would at last know a measure of peace. He thought of Lyanna, hidden away in Dorne, waiting. She had believed in him, believed that together they could shape the future. But the future seemed precarious indeed. As darkness fell, he made his way toward the library, feeling a need for quiet reflection. He passed unlit sconces and lonely halls, the Red Keep emptier than usual at this hour. War had emptied it of many lords, and fear had driven others away. The library was deserted. Rows of shelves rose tall, heavy with tomes and scrolls. Rhaegar trailed a hand along the spines, thinking of the histories he had once devoured in his youth, searching for answers in the pages of prophecy. The world had felt so full of possibility then. Now it felt weighed down by the consequences of every choice. He found a small table near a narrow window, and settled himself, lighting a taper so that the small flame danced over his hands. His thoughts drifted. He recalled the swirling rumor that had sparked the rebellion, that he had stolen Lyanna Stark from her betrothed. It was only half true. He had stolen her in the eyes of the world, yet they had both longed to be free of constraints they despised. He had believed their union was foretold in ancient prophecy, that their child might be the prince that was promised. But with so many men dead, so much blood spilled, he wondered if that prophecy was worth the cost. He sat there for some time, lost in contemplation. At length, footsteps sounded softly behind him. He turned to see Jaime Lannister, clad in the white cloak of the Kingsguard. Jaime was very young for such an honor, hardly more than a youth, but already renowned for his skill. Rhaegar beckoned him closer. "Sir Jaime," he greeted quietly. "What brings you here so late?" Jaime's eyes flicked to the shelves. "The king bid me patrol the keep, my prince. He's restless tonight. He asked for you earlier, but when he heard you were with your knights, he sent me away. I decided to check the library." Rhaegar nodded. "I see. Did he say what he wanted? Jaime's expression was grim. He ranted about traitors lurking in the halls. He demanded to know if you were conspiring with that Stark. He wants to see your loyalty proven. Rhaegar pressed his lips together, frustration burning in his chest. My father's suspicion never ends. He calls for me. I will come. But I will not deliver Ned Stark's head to him, if that is what he imagines. Then, Jaime hesitated. He might press the issue. You know how he is. Rhaegar nodded, standing from the table. I do. Thank you for the warning, Jaime. Return to him if you must. Tell him I am in the keep, that I am not plotting a coup. If it soothes him, I'll speak with him at sunrise. Jaime dipped his head, turning to leave. But before he stepped away, Rhaegar spoke again. Jaime, you're a Kingsguard, sworn to protect the king. But you're also a man with a conscience. If my father ever orders you to perform an act you know is monstrous, remember your vows are to protect the realm as well as the king. Jaime's face twitched, as though uncertain how to respond. I will remember, Prince Rhaegar. Then he turned and was gone, the white cloak trailing behind him into the dark corridor. Left alone, Rhaegar blew out the taper. That conversation had left him with a subtle chill. He dreaded what might transpire if Aerys's paranoia deepened. He returned to his rooms, hoping for some rest, though he knew sleep would likely be as fitful as before. Morning brought a brittle sort of calm. Rhaegar roused himself, splashed water on his face, and donned a fresh tunic. The bruise on his ribs had blossomed into new shades of purple and yellow, a reminder of how close Robert's hammer had come to killing him. He thanked the seven that he still drew breath. Then he made his way to his father's apartments. The corridor leading to the king's rooms was thick with smoke from braziers, as though the king insisted on stifling heat. A sense of foreboding settled in Rhaegar's gut. 2 Kingsguards stood at attention, Jaime among them, along with Sir Luwin Martell, the Dornish member of the Kingsguard who was kin to Princess Elia. Luwin inclined his head. He's inside, my prince. In one of his moods. Rhaegar steeled himself and stepped through the doors. The chamber was dim, only a few candles guttering. The scent of rancid sweat and stale wine hit him. Aerys sat in a tall back chair near a cold hearth, his hair unkempt, wearing a heavy black robe despite the heat. His fingers tapped ceaselessly against the armrest, nails clacking. Rhaegar bowed, then straightened. Father, you wish to see me. Aerys' eyes snapped up, rimmed with red. Where were you last night, boy? He demanded, voice harsh. Plotting with your little council of traitors? Or lying with some whore while the realm decays? Spittle clung to his lip. Rhaegar forced himself to remain calm. I was securing the loyalty of our men, father, ensuring the city remains at peace. The rebels have begun to yield. There is no cause for alarm. Aerys let out a sharp laugh, the sound echoing in the cramped chamber. No cause for alarm, you say? Yet the wolves remain alive. The fish lords wander my halls. The stag's brother hides in his castle. You have coddled them all. They should burn, all of them. His voice lowered to a hiss. I am the king. You do not decide who lives or dies. Rhaegar took a measured breath. I ask you to trust me, father. If we bring them to heel with fairness, they will pose no threat. The war will truly end, and the realm will heal. If we burn them, we only stoke more rebellion. The king's hands clenched on the armrests, trembling. For a moment, Rhaegar feared he might leap up and lash out. But Aerys only glared with those fevered eyes, old resentment flaring. You wish to steal my throne, he muttered. You want them to love you more than fear me. Well, you may have that. But mark me, boy, if I so much as hear a whisper that you plan to take my crown, I will burn this city to ash. I have the wildfire. I have it hidden in all the secret places. You know that. Rhaegar's stomach twisted. Yes, he knew that. It was the greatest nightmare the realm faced. That if the king felt cornered, he would give the order, and all of King's Landing would die in green fire. Rhaegar had prayed it would never come to that. He kept his voice steady. I have no desire to seize power. I only serve the realm's best interests, and yours, father. Aerys sneered, then waved a dismissive hand. Get out of my sight. You can pretend to be the realm's savior. See how well they praise you when the next rebellion comes. And it will come, boy. Mercy is weakness. He let out a ragged cough, spitting onto the floor, then turned away. Rhaegar offered a short bow and withdrew, heart pounding. Outside, Jaime and Luwin traded glances, but said nothing as he passed. The moment he was beyond the king's chambers, Rhaegar stopped and drew a shaking breath. He needed to ensure that wildfire never saw the light of day. Could he risk searching for it? Could he dismantle it quietly? That might push Aerys over the edge if discovered, and if Rhaegar did nothing, the threat remained. At midday, he retreated to his own solar, summoning a few of his most trusted men. Arthur Dayne, Barristan Selmy, and Jon Connington. He told them, voice low, of his father's threat. The mention of wildfire made them pale. Barristan's hand clenched into a fist. We cannot allow him to hold the city hostage. Connington cursed under his breath. Arthur Dayne's eyes narrowed as he spoke in that calm, measured tone. If we attempt to remove him from power, many will say it's treason. But if we do not, we risk all. Is there a middle path? Rhaegar considered. He is still the king, an anointed Targaryen. Many lords might hesitate to dethrone him. Yet if he gives the order to ignite the wildfire, it's unthinkable. He paused, wrestling with an idea. Perhaps we can quietly locate the caches of wildfire and have them removed or neutralized without alerting him. But we must do so carefully. Connington nodded. I can see to it. My men can move discreetly. But we'll need a name. A contact in the Alchemists' Guild. They are the ones who create and store it. They might be loyal to your father. Rhaegar's gaze slipped to Barristan. We'll see what can be done. For now, let's proceed with caution. I do not want the city to suspect a coup. But the moment my father makes one move to light those fires, we must be ready. No. The men agreed, solemn-faced, each understanding the enormity of the risk. Barristan volunteered to handle the approach to the alchemists, carefully, under the guise of checking on old storehouses from previous wars. Arthur would remain near Ned Stark to guard him, and to keep watch on the king's comings and goings. Connington would post loyal men in vantage points around the city quietly, so that any unusual movement by the king's guard could be reported. That settled, Rhaegar dismissed them, feeling the weight of conspiracy settle on his shoulders. He was the crown prince, sworn to protect the realm, and now he plotted behind his father's back. But the alternative was letting madness reign. If his father set the city ablaze, it would be the end of everything Rhaegar fought for. The next few days passed in a tense routine. Rhaegar continued to receive letters from across the realm, some from the Vale, where Lord Jon Arryn was said to be considering his next move, some from the north, though none directly from Winterfell yet. The Tullys had departed, leaving behind cautious hope that the Riverlands would accept Rhaegar's peace. Barristan set out for Storm's End, bearing messages of reconciliation. Rhaegar visited Ned Stark daily, observing how the fever waxed and waned, praying the man would not succumb before the realm could truly be made whole. Late one afternoon, as the sun slanted through the windows of the Maester's tower, Ned was awake and more coherent. Rhaegar entered quietly and found him gazing through the narrow window, slit at the sprawl of King's Landing below. It's an ugly city, Ned murmured, voice still rough. But I suppose it's better than rotting on the battlefield. Rhaegar approached the bedside. You're sitting up. That's progress. Ned nodded, though he still looked pale. The Maester says I might be able to travel in another fortnight if I improve. He turned his gaze to Rhaegar. Do you truly mean for me to see Lyanna? Rhaegar moved closer. Yes, if you have the strength, I will arrange it. A flicker of emotion passed over Ned's face, relief mixed with apprehension. Good. I cannot bear this limbo. My family has been torn apart. My father, my brother, gone. Lyanna, lost for so long. If I can bring her home, perhaps the North will not see another war. Rhaegar placed a hand gently on Ned's arm. I do not wish to keep her from you, but there's the matter of what she wants. She may not wish to return to Winterfell, as though nothing has changed. Ned's jaw tightened. She is a Stark of Winterfell, and we are her people. If she was truly not taken by force. He trailed off. Rhaegar met his eyes. I swear to you, Ned, she came willingly. And yes, I love her. He almost choked on the enormity of that confession, but it felt right to voice it. She told me she feared being bound to Robert, but she also feared the realm's reaction if we were discovered. We thought we could keep it secret. We were wrong. A heavy silence fell. At length Ned sighed. War is rarely avoided for long in this realm. But if you are truthful, then perhaps we can find a way forward. My sister's happiness matters to me, but so does the North's dignity. Rhaegar bowed his head. I will respect that. As soon as you can ride, we'll leave for Dorne together, or send word that she can join us here, whichever is safer. My father is the greatest danger, but if I can keep him contained, you may see her soon. That. Ned glanced out the window again, the sunlight painting the angles of his face in gold. Then let us pray I heal quickly, and that your father does not cast us all into the flames before I do. Rhaegar felt a chill at the words, but forced a small smile. We will prevent it. I have good men. No matter what it takes, the realm will not burn again. Oh no. He left Ned with that thought, and made his way back down into the keep. Dusk was approaching, and he had one more task for the day. A private word with Grand Maester Pycelle. Though he did not trust the old man's loyalty entirely, Pycelle's position meant that he might have knowledge of the king's mental and physical state. If Aerys's mania worsened, Rhaegar had to know. He found Pycelle in his sanctum, a cramped chamber with shelves full of potions and scrolls. The old maester puffed up when Rhaegar arrived, hurrying to bow. Prince Rhaegar, to what do I owe this honor? Rhaegar closed the door behind him. Grand Maester, I need truth from you. My father's mind is unsteady. Have you examined him? Is there any remedy? Any hope that he can be calmed? Pycelle's thick white brows knitted. The king resents my intrusions. He has not permitted me to administer any drafts or tinctures of a sedative nature. I fear his condition has only worsened. He mutters endlessly in the night, sees conspirators in every shadow. Rhaegar drummed his fingers on a nearby table. I suspected as much. But if there is something, an herbal mixture you could slip into his wine that might at least dull his most violent impulses, would you do it, if I ask? That dear murder. Pycelle blanched, beard quivering. Prince, that is dangerous. If the king caught wind that his wine was tampered with, he would call it treason. He might have us all burned. And if the dose was too high, Rhaegar raised a hand to forestall further protest. I do not ask you to kill him, Grand Maester, only to help him. If you cannot, I understand. But the time may come when we have no choice. Pycelle wrung his hands. I will consider what might be done if dire necessity arises. But for now, I remain loyal to House Targaryen, to the king. I cannot risk direct defiance. Rhaegar inclined his head. And I do not ask you to defy him outright, only to keep an open mind. My father threatens to burn the city if he feels cornered. Remember that. With that, he departed, leaving Pycelle torn between fear of the king and fear of the city's destruction. It was a moral quandary the old man would have to wrestle with on his own. But Rhaegar felt a pang of guilt for even suggesting it. How far would he go to protect the realm from his father's madness? Poisoning him into a stupor seemed a grim last resort. Yet, if the alternative was letting countless innocents die in green flame, night draped itself over King's Landing once more, and Rhaegar found himself standing on a balcony that overlooked the Blackwater Rush. The river wound away in the moonlight, reflecting the faint glow of the city's torches. He could see ships moored at the docks, could faintly hear the clang of distant smiths. The city never truly slept, full of thousands of souls, each with their own hopes and fears. He told himself that if he could keep the realm from fracturing, if he could bring the North, the Vale, the Riverlands and the Stormlands under a single banner again without more slaughter, then all this heartbreak might not be in vain. He thought of Lyanna, wild, fierce Lyanna, with blue winter roses in her hair. He remembered her laughter, echoing in the gods' wood at Harrenhal. The stolen glance they'd shared. He remembered how she'd wept with frustration, cursing the world that would see her forced into a marriage she did not want. She had felt caged, as he had, each by expectations they had never asked for. Together, they had dreamed of a child who might usher in a better age. But that dream had turned to ashes on the trident, drowning in the blood of thousands. Could they still reclaim some piece of it? The door behind him creaked. Arthur Dane stepped onto the balcony, the moonlight gleaming on his pale hair. He said nothing at first, merely joined Rhaegar at the balustrade. Two men stood side by side, letting the evening's hush settle around them. At last, Arthur spoke in a low voice. "I received a raven from our men in Dorne. Lyanna is well. She's grown restless but awaits your command." Rhaegar turned, relief mingling with sadness. She must be furious that Robert's war nearly destroyed the realm. If I had only found a better way. Arthur shook his head. "What's done is done. You have a chance now to mend this, to bring her back and prove your intentions to the north. But it must be handled delicately. If the king learns she's in Dorne, he might see her as a hostage or demand her punishment for fueling this war. We can't let her fall into his hands." "Dane?" Rhaegar's voice was firm. "I won't let that happen. Once Ned is well enough, we'll travel there with a select few. Perhaps your sister, Ashara, can help keep everything discreet. Then we'll bring Lyanna somewhere safe, maybe even to Winterfell. If that's her choice, I'll face whatever consequences come." Arthur nodded. "Very well. But we mustn't leave King's Landing without ensuring your father cannot wreak havoc in your absence. Or at least that men you trust remain here to keep an eye on him." "Men?" They fell silent again, the weight of all these dilemmas pressing upon them. Somewhere in the distance, a raven croaked in the night sky. The faint echo of waves lapped at the city's edges. Rhaegar felt the slow, rhythmic thud of his own heartbeat, reminding him that, for now, he was still alive, still free to choose. He would choose to save the realm if he could. He would choose to end the cycle of blood. The hours slid by. Eventually, Arthur retired, leaving Rhaegar alone with his thoughts. He let the moon trace its arc across the sky, lost in a swirl of hopes and fears for what lay ahead. Would the realm accept a Targaryen who refused to use fire and blood to enforce obedience? Could they truly move beyond old hatreds? Would the banners of the North and the Stormlands and the Riverlands truly lower their swords if offered a fair hand? Or would some new crisis arise, plunging Westeros into further horror? He had no answer, but as he gazed upon the sleeping city, he made a vow in his heart. He would not fail. He would not let the Seven Kingdoms drown in madness. He would not let Lyanna's faith in him prove misguided. If that meant confronting his father, if that meant risking everything, then so be it. The war had ended on the Trident, but another battle had just begun. A battle for the soul of the realm. Rhaegar closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw again the swirl of prophecies and the promise of a better dawn. He clung to that vision, however fragile, as the wind stirred his silvered hair in the moonlit hush. Rhaegar had grown accustomed to the uneasy stillness of his own private solar, where a single lamp cast distorted shadows along the walls. The hush was sometimes broken by the muffled tread of guards, or the distant clang of a dropped polearm. He stood at a small table, poring over a half-finished letter to Lord Jon Arryn, crossing out words and rewriting them with painstaking care. Outside, night had settled like a heavy cloak over King's Landing, dimming the city's flickering lights until they seemed like lost stars. The war was done, but he had never felt less at ease. The letter was supposed to invite Lord Arryn to King's Landing to formalize his surrender and to negotiate terms. Rhaegar read over the final lines, searching for the right tone that might persuade Jon Arryn to trust his intentions. The Vale had not been hammered nearly as hard as the Riverlands or the Stormlands. No pitched battles had erupted on its steep roads beyond a few skirmishes. Jon Arryn himself had once been a mentor to Ned Stark, and to the late Robert Baratheon, which meant any negotiations would be fraught with old loyalties and resentments. Rhaegar dipped his quill and carefully scratched a final sentence. Therefore, in the name of peace, I extend to you a royal welcome. I offer clemency, fellowship, and the recognition of your ancestral rights. Should you choose to seek redress for the tragedies of war, know that we stand ready to hear your petitions. Rhaegar Targaryen. He sat back and sighed, rotating his shoulders. His ribs still ached from the blow Robert had dealt him, and no amount of rest seemed to soothe the bruising. Setting the quill aside, he reached for a cup of watered wine. The taste was tart, but the slight bite was enough to keep him alert. He thought of how many letters he'd written in the past weeks, each an attempt to coax or reassure some battered region of the realm. And for each letter penned, a kernel of fear remained in his stomach, an echo of his father's threat to scorch the city if he felt cornered. Aerys' madness loomed like a thundercloud. There came a light knock at the door. Rhaegar turned and called softly, "Enter." Sir Arthur Dayne stepped inside, his posture straight-backed as ever, though there was a faint weariness to his eyes. He bowed his head in greeting before speaking in that measured tone of his. "I've just come from the Maester's tower. Eddard Stark is improved, at least by degrees." He rose from his bed and took a few steps, though it cost him a good deal of strength. He asked when he might depart for Dorne. Rhaegar set his cup down with a soft clink. "He grows impatient. I can hardly blame him. He's been a caged wolf in these halls for too long." Arthur nodded. He spoke of the same. He said he wants to see Lyanna with his own eyes, confirm that she's safe. Rhaegar's thoughts churned. If he's nearly strong enough to travel, then we must prepare discreetly. I want no sudden moves that might prompt the king's suspicion. Barristan is still away at Storm's End. I've yet to receive word on whether Stannis will bend the knee or resist. Arthur stood in silence, waiting for direction. Rhaegar gazed into the distance, picturing the coastline where Storm's End towered above the sea. "We'll wait for Barristan's report. Once we know the Stormlands are settled, I'll have fewer worries about leaving the city." Arthur shifted. "And what of the wildfire caches?" "John Connington has been quietly searching, but the Alchemists' Guild is well guarded. Word is the Guild only obeys the king. If we push too hard, Aerys might learn of it." "Mensta." Rhaegar sighed. "We continue as we have, discreet inquiries, searching for any who might be sympathetic. Some of the younger acolytes might not share the king's mania. We can't dismantle it all at once, but if we can discover where he stashed the largest stores, perhaps we can neutralize those first." Arthur gave a tight nod. "Understood. I'll speak with John again this evening." And he lingered a moment longer, eyes on Rhaegar's face. "Are you well, my prince?" It was a personal question, gently asked. Rhaegar pressed a hand to his ribs. "As well as can be expected." "Thank you, Arthur. Truly, I'm grateful for your loyalty." Arthur's gaze flickered. "We all stand on a precarious ledge, but I believe in your cause. Rest if you can." Then he bowed once more and left, footsteps echoing softly down the corridor. Rhaegar closed his eyes, letting the hush of the solar envelop him. Sometimes he still tasted the river silt in his mouth from the trident, felt the jolt of Robert's hammer reverberate through his sword arm. He wondered if the ghosts of that battlefield would ever fade. For all his talk of prophecy and destiny, war remained an ugly testament to the cost of pride and misunderstanding. Had he truly chosen the right path, or had he only set a match to kindling? At length, he rose, donned a heavier cloak, and stepped out into the corridor. He made his way to the library once more, feeling a pull to the old books and scrolls. Perhaps he might find some record of previous disputes between king and heir, some clue as to how other princes had navigated their father's madness. The halls were lit by torches in iron sconces, which painted the stone walls in flickering gold. A pair of guards bowed as he passed. Though he returned their nod with a polite inclination of his head, part of him felt uneasy at how their eyes followed him. Uncertain, assessing. He reached the library and found it deserted except for a single acolyte dozing on a stool. The rows of shelves felt familiar by now. A labyrinth of parchment that smelled of dust and old ink. Rhaegar ran a hand along the spines, searching for a particular volume. He recalled that there was once a king in the distant Targaryen line who had grown erratic, perhaps not as violently mad as Aerys, but unbalanced enough that the realm had forced him to step aside for his heir. How had that transition happened? But as he scanned the titles, he could find no direct mention. He supposed the keepers of the histories had been careful to gloss over such dark chapters. At last, he paused near a window slit, letting a faint breeze ruffle his hair. The city beyond was silent, or near enough. But he imagined he could sense the pulse of countless lives. If his father unleashed wildfire, all those lives would burn. The very thought made his stomach churn. He turned away and decided that searching the library for answers was futile. He needed to rely on the living hearts around him, those whose counsel he trusted. Barristan. Arthur. Connington. If it came to it, even Jaime Lannister might stand aside rather than obey an order of mass slaughter. He slipped out of the library and headed instead for the Maester's Tower. Perhaps Ned Stark would still be awake. If the man had managed to stand, then conversation might bring clarity. Their relationship was one of necessity right now, but Rhaegar sensed in Ned a kindred spirit of honor. It was a fragile bond, yet it might hold if nurtured with honesty. Once inside the tower, he climbed the spiral steps until he reached the landing. A single torch flickered in the bracket near the door. The Maester on duty, the same watery-eyed fellow who tended Ned these past days, stood respectfully aside as Rhaegar entered. Within, he found Ned propped against pillows, gazing at the closed window shutters with a look of restless frustration. Ned turned his head at Rhaegar's approach. He looked wan but more alert than before. "Prince Rhaegar," he said in a low voice. "I expected you might come. I've been counting the hours." Rhaegar inclined his head in greeting. "I'm glad to see you upright." Ned managed a faint, humorless smile. "I sit, but I feel weaker than a newborn colt if I stand too long." He shifted, wincing at the pull of his bandaged side. "Still, I'll find the strength to ride if I must. My sister weighs heavily on my mind." Rhaegar came around to the chair beside the bed, seating himself carefully. "I spoke with Arthur Dayne. The plan is still to bring you to Dorne as soon as we know the Stormlands will not flare into rebellion. I need Barristan's word that Stannis has accepted our peace." Ned frowned. "And if Stannis does not, will you fight him, after all that's happened?" Rhaegar sighed, rubbing his brow. "I'd rather not. But if Stannis remains defiant, the realm might see no choice. I've dispatched Barristan to treat with him. Stannis is a stubborn man, but he is no fool. He must see that continuing a rebellion without Robert is hopeless." Ned's gray eyes lingered on Rhaegar. "When we set out to free Lyanna, Robert's passion ran hotter than the sun. But for me, it was never only about Lyanna. It was also the memory of my father and brother, murdered by your father. That wound will not heal easily. In the north, some men still whisper that all Targaryens are cursed, that you are your father's heir in more than name." "No." Rhaegar felt a flush of shame and sadness. "I have no illusions about what was done to Rickard and Brandon Stark. All I can offer is that I am not my father. If the North will give me a chance, I will do right by them." He paused. "When I bring you to Lyanna, let her speak for herself. I think she will tell you that none of this was forced upon her. She wanted out of a marriage that held no warmth for her heart." Ned's expression flickered with something like sorrow. "I never knew how she truly felt about Robert. She was so wild and spirited, and Robert, he was large as a bear, brash, and never short of confidence. I thought it might be a decent match. Shows how little I understood." He coughed, pressing a hand to his injured side. "I only hope that when I see her, she does not resent me for failing to stop the war." Rhaegar reached out, laying a hand gently on Ned's arm. "She won't blame you. She may blame me. The secrecy, spiriting her away, sparked so many rumors. It was reckless. Yet at the time I saw no other choice. I was desperate to escape the suffocating doom of my father's rule and to grasp at the prophecy I believed in." Ned looked at him, brow creased. "Prophecy?" Rhaegar hesitated, aware that speaking too openly might sound mad, especially after the carnage the realm had endured. But Ned was a man of honor, and perhaps he deserved some truth. "I was raised on tales of a promised prince, one who would unite the realm against a coming darkness. My father became fixated on these prophecies in his early years, though in time, his mind decayed. He stopped, uncertain how to continue without sounding a fool. Ned's gaze held no mockery, only curiosity and weariness. You believed you had a greater destiny. Rhaegar nodded slowly. Yes, at least I thought so. I thought that a child born of certain unions might one day save us from threats beyond our imagining. It sounds grandiose now, or at least naive, but that belief guided me. And when I met Lyanna, I felt certain she was part of that destiny. Ned was silent a long moment. My sister always did have a spark in her, something that set her apart. But I don't pretend to know about prophecies. If such a threat exists, I can only hope you are right about the realm needing to be united. They let the hush settle, each man wrestling with thoughts too large to name. At length, Rhaegar stood. I won't keep you up. You need your rest. Heal, Ned. With luck, Barristan will return soon, and we can set our plan in motion. Ned nodded, leaning back against the pillows, the flicker of the torch revealing the hollowness in his cheeks. I'll be ready. Then, as Rhaegar moved toward the door, Ned called after him in a tired voice, Thank you, for at least trying to mend this. I won't forget. Rhaegar inclined his head. Nor will I. He slipped out, leaving the corridor with the swirl of uneasy hope trailing him like an invisible cloak. Once back in his own rooms, he found the letter to Jon Arryn waiting on the table. He sealed it with the Targaryen sigil and set it aside for dispatch. The hour was late, but rest came fitfully. His mind conjured images of the king's fire-obsessed eyes, the swirl of half-lost prophecies, and the memory of Robert's final roar on the trident. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him. When dawn came, a messenger arrived at his door, breathless and dusty from the roads. Sir Barristan Selmy had sent word from Storm's End. Rhaegar read the parchment swiftly, relief and tension mixing. Barristan had met with Stannis. The new lord of the Stormlands had not bent the knee outright, but he had neither declared open defiance. He demanded assurances, demanded to know that the king would not raise Storm's End in vengeance. Barristan had done his best to persuade him that Rhaegar, not Aerys, would determine the realm's future. Stannis had agreed to travel to King's Landing to judge this peace for himself, bringing a modest retinue, no more than 100 men, so as not to provoke a confrontation. He would arrive within a fortnight. Rhaegar exhaled, setting the parchment aside. If Stannis came in person, that at least indicated he was willing to listen. The question was whether they could satisfy his demands for justice without stoking the king's fury. Another uncertain game. Still, it was better than open rebellion. He gathered Arthur Dayne, Jon Connington, and a few others for a quick conference in a small antechamber. The news was shared, and speculation filled the air. Connington frowned. Stannis is not Robert. He's cold, logical. If he sees a chance to improve his position, he'll take it. But I doubt we can expect warmth. Rhaegar nodded. Warmth I can do without. I just need him to stand down, to accept the new order. If that means granting him certain concessions, I'll weigh it. The alternative is more blood. I won't have it. Arthur tapped a gauntleted finger on the table. We must prepare. If Stannis arrives in the city, the king may grow paranoid. He might demand that Stannis be seized or executed. Connington pursed his lips. We must keep the king out of that meeting if possible, or at least ensure there's no direct confrontation. Rhaegar's stomach clenched at the thought of Aerys crossing paths with Stannis Baratheon, a man whose brother had led a rebellion that nearly toppled the throne. Still, there was no easy solution. Then we managed the king carefully. We staged the meeting in the Red Keep's Great Hall, but we do not invite Aerys unless he demands it. I'll handle him if he becomes difficult. It was a feeble plan, but in these circumstances, the best they could devise. Days passed in a taut sort of calm. Rhaegar continued to see to the city's needs. Messages trickled in from the Vale. Lord Arryn was considering the prince's invitation but had yet to commit. The Tullys had departed, with Hoster Tully's promise that the Riverlands would remain peaceful. The North was silent, presumably awaiting Ned's return, or at least word of his health. Rumors began to swirl among the small folk. Some said the North would rise again if Ned Stark was held hostage. Others insisted that the prince was forging an alliance with the wolves, which might foretell a wedding or a new monarchy. Nobody seemed entirely sure where the king fit in all this. The common folk whispered that Aerys seldom appeared in public anymore, and that it was Prince Rhaegar who made decisions. Some found hope in that. Others feared the king's vengeance. To quell the tension, Rhaegar took small steps to placate the city's population. He ordered the distribution of grain to the poorest districts, arranged for sellswords who had flocked to King's Landing to be paid off and encouraged to leave. He listened to local disputes in a makeshift audience chamber in the courtyard, ensuring that justice was dispensed fairly. Each day he tried to embody the vision of a ruler who cared for the realm more than for displays of power. But each night, he would think of the wildfire rumored to be hidden beneath the streets, and wonder if it might all go up in flames regardless. A week after Barristan's letter, word arrived that Stannis' party was on the King's Road. Less than 2 days out, Rhaegar felt the old knot of anxiety twist in his gut. He knew how quickly things could spiral if Aerys felt threatened. So he requested a private audience with his father. He did not want to, but it was necessary. Perhaps he could prepare Aerys for Stannis' arrival, avoid a sudden shock. He made the slow walk through the corridors leading to the king's apartments, flanked by 2 guards he trusted, Connington at his left and Arthur Dayne at his right. The hush felt suffocating. They passed the other members of the King's Guard who stood watch outside the door. Sir Jaime Lannister gave Rhaegar a nod, though his expression was guarded. Sir Lewin Martell stared off as if lost in thought. Within the apartment, the air was thick with stale heat. Braziers burned even though the day was mild. Aerys was hunched by a table, picking at a tray of half-rotten fruit. His hair hung lank around his shoulders, and his eyes had the same wild sheen Rhaegar remembered from all his worst nightmares. At the creak of the door, he looked up sharply, a glimmer of suspicion in those eyes. "Father," Rhaegar said, stepping forward with a careful bow, "I am to inform you of a development regarding the Stormlands." Aerys let out a bark of a laugh that turned into a hacking cough. He spat something onto the table. Rhaegar tried not to look too closely. The Stormlands. The Stags. Traitors, all. Why do you bother me with this? Let them all rot. Rhaegar approached more slowly, feeling the heat of the braziers on his face. Stannis Baratheon is on the road here. He comes to pay homage, or so we hope, to accept peace. I wished for you to know before he arrived at our gates. Be. Aerys bared his teeth in a mockery of a smile. Peace. Ah. A dog who's been whipped might lie down, but it still has teeth. You cannot trust him. His voice dropped to a hiss. I smell betrayal in every corner. Rhaegar kept his tone even. He arrives within 2 days. I will greet him in the throne room, offer him terms, and ensure there's no further conflict. This is a moment to show the realm that Targaryens can be merciful, that we can bring everyone under one banner. Aerys' expression twisted. He shot up from his chair, ignoring the rotten fruit that tumbled onto the floor. His robe hung loosely on his gaunt frame. Mercy, mercy. That's all you prattle on about. You undermine me at every turn, boy. Do you think I don't see how the lords flock to you instead of their rightful king? Rhaegar steadied himself, resisting the urge to step back. Aerys' breath smelled sour. They flock to the future. The realm wants stability. That can be yours if you stand with me when I meet Stannis. Show him we are united in our desire to end bloodshed. For a moment, Aerys simply stared, his eyes flicking from Rhaegar to Arthur and Jon in the background, as if measuring how easily he could have them all executed on the spot. Then he let out a ragged exhale, reaching to steady himself on the table's edge. Fine, he spat. Bring him before me. But do not speak of pardons without my leave, do you hear? I have not forgotten that these men rose against me. Rhaegar inclined his head. I will consult you, father. Aerys sank back into his chair, one hand tremoring against the wood. His voice lowered to a mutter. I still hold the power. They will all learn I am not to be trifled with. Then he seemed to lose interest. He turned back to the table, grabbing a piece of fruit and sinking his teeth into it, letting juice dribble onto his chin. It was a dismissal, as stark as any words. Rhaegar bowed again and withdrew, feeling the tension coil through him. Outside in the corridor, Arthur and Connington both looked to him questioningly. Rhaegar pressed his lips together and shook his head slightly, indicating they should not speak until they were clear of the king's presence. Only when they were well down the hall did Rhaegar finally murmur, "He says he'll allow me to host Stannis, but I sense he'll meddle at the first opportunity." Connington glanced back over his shoulder. "We'll have guards posted. The king won't be able to simply seize Stannis, not without a fight. And I suspect he's too fearful of your loyalists to provoke open conflict." Arthur nodded, though worry etched his features. "We must remain vigilant." 2 days later, as the first glimmers of dawn broke over the city walls, Rhaegar stood atop one of the Red Keep's ramparts, scanning the horizon. Through the thin morning mist, he glimpsed a column of riders approaching on the King's Road. The wind carried the faint banner of the crowned stag, black on gold. Stannis had arrived. Rhaegar felt his pulse quicken. He hoped that Barristan had eased the man's suspicions, but Stannis Baratheon was known for unwavering resolve, not easy compromise. By midday, the riders stood at the city gates. Rhaegar descended to the courtyard to greet them. He wore his finest black and silver attire, the three-headed dragon discreetly embroidered on his chest. Arthur Dayne and Jon Connington flanked him, while a small company of Targaryen men-at-arms formed a respectful escort. Stannis Baratheon rode at the head of his group, a tall, lean man with a jaw like granite and cold blue eyes. Behind him, perhaps 100 Stormlanders, some bearing the badge of House Baratheon, others the sigils of smaller Stormland families. There was no extravagance, no bright displays, only a grim determination. Barristan Selmy rode beside Stannis, expression carefully neutral, though relief flickered in his eyes at seeing Rhaegar. They reined in. Stannis dismounted stiffly. He bowed, though the motion was more perfunctory than deferential. "Prince Rhaegar," he said in his flat voice, "I've come as agreed." Rhaegar inclined his head. "Lord Stannis, I welcome you to King's Landing in the spirit of reconciliation. Please bring your men inside the walls as guests under my protection. I trust you have no objections to my men escorting you to the Red Keep, simply for the sake of order." Stannis' lips pressed into a thin line. "If we are guests, then we'll abide by your customs. But let it be known that should any harm come to us, Storm's End will not rest until justice is done." "No." Rhaegar offered a polite, measured smile. "I understand. Come." He gestured for them to move forward. Barristan leaned over briefly to murmur something in Stannis' ear, and the man gave a curt nod before following. Rhaegar fell in beside him, matching the man's stride. They walked through the gate, past rows of watchful gold cloaks and city dwellers, peering from a safe distance. The city streets were calmer than they had been. Stannis' men took in the sights with grim curiosity. The small folk peered from alleyways, uncertain whether these newcomers were friend or foe. Here and there a few voices called out, but the tension was palpable. Rhaegar led them through the winding roads up to the Red Keep's main courtyard, where the Targaryen banners fluttered in a stiff breeze. Inside the keep, Stannis and his retinue were shown to prepared quarters. Rhaegar had commanded the servants to outfit the rooms with enough basic comforts, fresh linens, food and wine, though nothing lavish. He did not want to stoke suspicion or appear to bribe them with finery. Stannis regarded these preparations with his usual stoic demeanor. "You are gracious," he said, "though without warmth, but I care more for honest words and comfortable beds." Rhaegar merely nodded. "Then let us speak honest words soon." He turned to Barristan, who approached. "Sir Barristan, you have my thanks for ensuring Stannis' arrival. We'll hold a formal audience in the throne room come evening. Until then, see that Lord Stannis has anything he requires." With that, Rhaegar departed, heading to prepare himself for a tense reception. Word had already been sent to the king, whether it would do any good or not. Eris might appear, might not. Rhaegar could only plan for either contingency. He made his way to his own chambers, where he found Arthur Dayne awaiting him. Arthur took a breath. "My prince, Ned Stark heard of Stannis' arrival. He wishes to attend the audience tonight." though he can barely stand for long. Rhaegar hesitated. If he stands before Stannis, it might signal to the Stormlands that Ned Stark no longer supports vengeance against House Targaryen. That's good. But I don't wish to risk his health. Arthur nodded. The Maester advises against any strain, but Ned is adamant. He sees it as a chance to show that the war truly is over. Rhaegar leaned against a tall-backed chair, weighing the options. Let him come then, but ensure there's a seat for him. He mustn't worsen his wounds simply to make a point. Arthur bowed. I'll make the arrangements. When the appointed hour arrived, Rhaegar led a small procession through the Red Keep to the throne room. Guards flanked the towering doors, swords at their sides. Within, torches blazed in iron sconces, casting shadows across the pillars. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, its twisted swords silent witness to 1,000 intrigues. Before it, rows of lesser seats and benches had been placed, an impromptu arrangement to accommodate the Stormland retinue and various lords or knights who had trickled back to King's Landing under Rhaegar's promise of peace. Rhaegar entered from a side entrance, wearing a cloak of black velvet, pinned with a simple silver clasp. Arthur Dayne walked beside him, then took a place off to the side among the other Kingsguard. Ned Stark was there, pale but upright, seated carefully at the end of a short row near the dais. He inclined his head to Rhaegar, who returned the gesture with a subtle glance of concern. Ned offered the smallest of reassuring nods, though strain tightened his jaw. The hall quieted as Stannis and his men arrived. They strode down the center aisle, the echo of their footfalls amplified by the vaulted ceiling. Stannis wore plain armor, no flourish, and the stag sigil glinted on his breastplate. He and his retinue halted a few paces before the dais where Rhaegar stood. The hush thickened. "Lord Stannis Baratheon," Rhaegar began, voice echoing. "You come to the capital in peace, seeking terms." Stannis regarded him with unflinching eyes. Prince Rhaegar. I come to see if this talk of clemency is more than empty promises." Somewhere behind them, a door slammed. Heads turned. A figure emerged from a side passage. Aerys Targaryen himself, hair matted, robe half dragging on the floor. A few men gasped. The king rarely made a public showing these days. Rhaegar felt his heart pound. He forced a neutral expression as his father advanced, flanked by 2 white-cloaked Kingsguard, including Jaime Lannister. Aerys's voice rang out high and brittle. "You speak of empty promises, Stannis Baratheon. It was your brother who promised death to House Targaryen, and now he rots in the mud. Perhaps you will join him if I find your words lacking." An uneasy stir ran through the hall. Rhaegar stepped forward, carefully placing himself partway between Stannis and the king. "Father, Lord Stannis has come to speak of peace. We need no further bloodshed." Aerys's eyes flicked to Rhaegar, then back to Stannis. "Peace? Yes, so you say. But this one's brother raised armies against me. He marched on my city. Why should I let him live?" Stannis' posture stiffened, but he inclined his head minimally, defiance in his eyes. "Because you will gain nothing by killing me, your grace. The Stormlands will not bend to a tyrant, but if Prince Rhaegar's promises are genuine, I will recognize him as the realm's heir and yield to the crown's authority." Aerys spat. "The crown's authority? You speak to the king, not his simpering son." Rhaegar felt the tension like a coil about to snap. He raised a hand, turning slightly so he could address both Aerys and Stannis. "The king is the rightful ruler," he said steadily, "and I, his son, seek to carry out his will by ending this war. Lord Stannis has come here in good faith. Let us hear him." Aerys let out a thin cackle. "You see how my own child undermines me, Stannis. He preaches mercy, though you and your ilk deserve the flame. But very well. Speak your piece, so I may judge you." Stannis' jaw tightened. For a moment, Rhaegar feared the Stormlander might speak too bluntly and ignite the king's fury. But Stannis simply inhaled. "Your grace, I acknowledge that Robert Baratheon waged war against the throne. With him dead, House Baratheon must decide its path. I have no wish to continue a hopeless conflict, yet I demand that the Stormlands not be made to suffer unjust reprisals, and that my brother's body be returned to Storm's End for burial. I also ask that we be free to govern our own lands without the cruelty once threatened." Aerys took a step closer. Rhaegar resisted the instinct to intervene. The king's lips curled back. "You make demands of me." His voice rose. "What if I say no?" An uneasy stir ran among the Stormland knights. Rhaegar took a measured breath. "If we deny these requests, Father, we risk driving the Stormlands into renewed strife. Robert's body is no great price to pay for peace, nor is allowing Stannis to rule his lands, as is his ancestral right. We must not forget that the House of Baratheon descends from Targaryen blood as well. Orys Baratheon was rumored to be Aegon's half-brother." Aerys cast a seething glare. "Don't lecture me on my own bloodline, boy." His chest heaved, but then he let out a rasping exhale. Perhaps some thread of self-preservation urged him not to provoke a new war at that moment. "Fine then. Take your brother's body and bury it in that dreary fortress. But do not think I forget your part in this treachery." Stannis gave a curt nod. "I understand, Your Grace. If we may continue." Rhaegar felt a guarded relief swirl within him. He gestured to a scribe, who stepped forward. "We can record your terms here, Lord Stannis. We also have further points. Formal recognition as Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, the promise that the king will not demand hostages from your household, and so on." "Now." Aerys let out a derisive snort. "Hostages? You think I want your simpering relatives fouling my halls?" He waved a hand as though shooing a fly. "I've seen enough of this. Rhaegar, deal with this Baratheon dog. But if he dares turn his back on us again, I'll have his head on a spike." Without another word, he spun and stalked out, leaving the throne room in a swirl of tension. Jaime Lannister followed, looking over his shoulder once at Rhaegar, with an unreadable expression. For a heartbeat, the hall remained silent. Then Rhaegar turned to Stannis, meeting his level gaze. "Thank you for your patience, Lord Stannis. Let us put the rest in writing and conclude these negotiations. Will you join me in the Solar?" Stannis inclined his head once more, not quite a bow, but enough to show respect. "Very well, Prince Rhaegar." With that, the throng began to break apart. Rhaegar descended from the dais, beckoning to Barristan and Connington. As he passed Ned Stark, who struggled to stand in some measure of courtesy, Rhaegar placed a gentle hand on Ned's shoulder, urging him to remain seated. Ned sank back, grimacing at the pain in his side, but he offered a nod of acknowledgement. A few Stormland knights noticed this exchange, their eyes lingering on Ned, the man who had once marched beside Robert. Perhaps they would carry home a tale that Eddard Stark sat in peace within the Red Keep, seemingly allied with Rhaegar. That alone might help quell rumors of continued rebellion. Rhaegar led Stannis to a smaller audience chamber, more comfortable, with a long table and several chairs. The Stormland lords trickled in behind him. There, in the presence of scribes and witnesses, they painstakingly set down the terms. Rhaegar allowed Stannis to speak first, listing what he needed for the Stormland's acceptance: a full pardon, the ability to bury Robert's remains, no demands of hostages, and no additional taxes levied as punishment. In return, Stannis agreed to swear fealty to King Aerys, though in truth, he was swearing to Rhaegar, to enforce peace in his domain, and to lend men should further unrest arise in the realm. The wording was carefully chosen to avoid rousing Aerys' suspicion that Rhaegar was cutting separate deals. Yet everyone in the room recognized that real power was being brokered outside the king's grasp. It was nearly dusk by the time the final signatures were placed. Rhaegar pressed his seal into the hot wax, and Stannis pressed the Baratheon seal. The documents were passed among witnesses. When it was finished, Stannis stood, gave a short, stiff bow, and said, "I trust your word, Prince Rhaegar. See that your father does not make me regret it." Rhaegar met his gaze. "I will do what I must to ensure peace stands. May you travel home safely when you depart. You are welcome to stay in King's Landing a short while, if you wish." Stannis waved a hand dismissively. "I have no love for this city. I'll remain only long enough to retrieve Robert's body." "Where do you keep him?" Barristan spoke up quietly. "He was taken to the Great Septi for prayers, then placed in a crypt nearby. I can guide you, my lord." "Minis." Stannis gave a solemn nod. Then that is where I will go. The arrangements for his transport must be made soon. There's no sense lingering. Rhaegar sensed Stannis's grief coiled beneath that stiff exterior. Robert had been flawed, reckless, brash. But to Stannis, he was still an older brother. The entire realm had lost something on the Trident. "I'll see to it that you are given every courtesy," Rhaegar said. "And you have my condolences." Stannis' mouth tightened, but he said nothing, only turned on his heel to depart with his men. Barristan followed. Rhaegar and Connington remained behind a moment, exchanging a look of cautious relief. "That went better than I feared," Connington admitted. "Your father seemed too unhinged to abide any compromise, but he let you handle it." Rhaegar let out a long breath. "Yes, for now. I suspect he's sulking somewhere, cursing me for overshadowing him. Let's hope it doesn't stir him to do something rash." As night settled over the keep, Rhaegar returned to check on Ned Stark. He found him in the corridor, leaning on Arthur Dayne's arm for support, determined to walk back to his chambers. When Ned saw Rhaegar approaching, he straightened slightly, though pain contorted his features. "Congratulations," Ned said in a low tone. "One less threat to worry about." "Yes," Rhaegar agreed, stepping forward to help. "Stannis is proud but not a fool. He knows there's nothing to gain by continuing the fight." Ned nodded, wincing. "It's a small mercy. The realm is stronger with fewer swords drawn." They moved slowly down the corridor, the guards at a respectful distance. Candles in wall sconces threw shifting shadows on the floor. "What of your father?" Ned asked, voice subdued. "I saw him raging. Are you certain he won't lash out?" Rhaegar couldn't hide his grimace. "No, I'm not certain. But he's hesitating for fear that he'll lose if he challenges me outright. That hesitation might save the realm." He paused, inhaling the cool, stone-scented air. "Once you're strong enough, I want us to leave. We'll go to Dorne to Lyanna. I can't guarantee my father won't scheme in my absence, but if we remain here, you'll never truly be safe, and I must see her too." Ned's expression flickered with relief at the mention of Lyanna. He nodded. "I'll be ready soon enough." Arthur kept an eye on them both, saying little, but Rhaegar could see the tension in his friend's eyes. He understood that tension all too well. If Aerys suspected their plan to whisk Ned Stark out of King's Landing, he might see it as betrayal, or even a prelude to usurpation. But the longer Ned remained, the higher the risk of something dire happening. Aerys might seize Ned as a hostage, or renege on his half-hearted tolerance. Rhaegar suspected that leaving quietly might be their only hope. They parted ways at the doors to the Maester's tower, Ned leaning on the stone arch with a tired exhale. Arthur lingered by Ned's side as Rhaegar made his way back to his own chambers. Candlelight flickered along the corridor, and he thought again of the peace that seemed fragile as thin glass. He had brokered terms with Stannis, but the Vale still needed to be brought back into the fold, and the North needed a formal settlement once Ned was healthy. So many open hands to shake, so many old wounds to dress, and overshadowing it all was King Aerys, with madness lurking behind his eyes and wildfire lurking in the city's bowels. He crossed the threshold into his chambers and found Varys waiting, perched on a cushioned chair like a patient spider. Rhaegar halted, tension flaring. "Varys, I don't recall inviting you here." Varys dipped his head, a placid smile on his face. "Forgive the intrusion, my prince. I bring news of certain developments in the city." Rhaegar closed the door, stepping forward warily. "Speak." Varys rose, smoothing his lilac robes. "Whispers abound that the king has demanded a recheck of his wildfire stores. He sent the pyromancers scurrying through the city's hidden vaults. I don't know if he intends to do anything with them, but the sudden interest is concerning." A chill ran through Rhaegar. "Did he say why?" Varys shrugged elegantly. "He claims it's for the defense of the city in case the rebels strike again. But now that Lord Stannis is here, it may be feeding his paranoia. I suspect he fears a plot in every shadow." Rhaegar felt his heart pound. If Aerys wanted to gather the wildfire under his direct control, it would be that much easier for him to ignite the city with a single order. "We must do something. I cannot allow him to centralize those stores." Varys inclined his head. I have ears in the Alchemists Guild. They're loyal to the king, but some might be amenable to well-placed bribes. I've tried to gather more precise information. For now, all I can say is that the king is meddling in dangerous territory. Rhaegar swallowed the bitterness in his throat. Continue your efforts, but be cautious. If he learns you're interfering, he might lash out. Keep me informed of any movements. Demnatrekin. Varys pressed his hands together. As you command, my prince. The realm depends on your steady hand in these turbulent times. He slipped out, leaving Rhaegar alone with the swirl of dread. The king was not idle. Even with the Stormlands pacified, the real danger came from within. For a moment, Rhaegar felt an almost overwhelming urge to simply take Lyanna and vanish. Let the lords squabble. Let the throne collapse under the weight of madness. But too many lives would be destroyed by that collapse. He could not run. He had to stand and contain the threat. The next morning, Rhaegar rose early, summoned Jon Connington, and told him about Varys' news. Connington cursed under his breath. We tried to find the caches ourselves, but the alchemists keep them in secret vaults. If the king is consolidating them, it might become easier for us to strike them all at once. But more dangerous if we fail. Rhaegar stared at the map on the table, which showed the labyrinth of King's Landing's underbelly in approximate detail. We cannot risk an open assault on the guild. That would start a war within these walls. But perhaps we can sabotage the wildfire, make it inert. The alchemists can be bribed or threatened into providing the crucial step to neutralize it. Nan soon. Connington eyed Rhaegar. That's high treason from the king's perspective, you know. Rhaegar's gaze turned steely. If it prevents him from burning thousands alive, I'll own that treason. There are worse betrayals than protecting the realm. They discussed it for a while, mapping out potential infiltration points, though the plan was incomplete at best. Connington left to consult with a few trusted knights. Rhaegar, shoulders tight with anxiety, made his way to the courtyard to clear his mind. The day was bright, crisp with a hint of the upcoming cooler seasons. He found a corner of the yard where a weathered archway overlooked a small garden. There he stood, letting the sun warm his face, thinking of how close the realm was to a better future, and how easily it might slip into ruin. Footsteps approached. Rhaegar glanced over to see Barristan Selmy, fresh from guiding Stannis' men to the Great CFT. The knight bowed. My prince, Stannis has seen Robert's remains. He was grave, but he thanked me for the courtesy. They'll likely depart within 2 days. Then, Rhaegar nodded. Good. And what of the king? Any sign he might attempt to hold Stannis here? Barristan shook his head. Not that I've heard, but I sense the king grows more erratic with each passing hour. It is only a matter of time before he finds some excuse to strike. I worry for Eddard Stark in particular. Rhaegar rubbed his temple. I plan to leave the city soon. Take Ned in a small escort, travel to Dorne. The king will be left with enough illusions of power to keep him from outright panic. Or so I hope. If he tries to move against Ned in my absence, the city might rally behind me. It's a risk, but I see no alternative. Barristan considered. If you go, at least half the king's guard should remain, or the king will suspect something. But Arthur might accompany you. Perhaps Sir Oswell went if he's still loyal to you above all. Travel light, discreet. Rhaegar let out a breath. Yes. I'm grateful for your counsel, Barristan. You've stood by me through so much. Once I return with Lyanna, we can finalize matters with the North. And perhaps that, in turn, will encourage the Vale and other hesitant lords to accept peace. Then now, Barristan inclined his head. I only do my duty, my prince. He departed, and Rhaegar was left in the half-shade of the garden arch. He heard the hush of a distant fountain trickling, and the quiet chatter of a few servants crossing the yard. For a moment, he closed his eyes, imagining an alternate life. One in which his father was not mad, in which he had not stolen Lyanna away, in which the realm had found peace without rivers of blood. But that was a fantasy. He opened his eyes to the real world's complications. 2 days later, As the midday sun poured onto the Red Keep's walls, Stannis and his men made ready to depart. Robert's coffin, a heavy thing of dark wood, was mounted on a wagon drawn by 4 solemn-eyed horses. The courtyard was silent as the Stormlanders prepared to ride out. Rhaegar came to bid them farewell, standing with Barristan and Connington. Stannis approached, gaze flicking to Rhaegar. "We take him home," Stannis said simply, a trace of emotion in his otherwise flinty voice. "I gave him my word once. No matter what happens, House Baratheon stands with its own. I only wish it had ended differently." Rhaegar inclined his head in sympathy. "I too wish that. The realm lost many good men. I hope what we do now will prevent more such loss." Stannis said nothing for a moment. Then he extended a gloved hand. After a beat, Rhaegar clasped it. "You have my oath," Stannis said, "that the Stormlands will not rise again, so long as the Crown honors the agreement we made." Rhaegar tightened his grip a fraction. "The Crown will travel safely." Stannis withdrew his hand, gave a curt nod, and mounted his horse. His retinue followed suit, the wagon bearing Robert's remains rumbling through the courtyard. A hush lingered, broken only by the clop of hooves on stone. By evening, the Baratheons were gone. Rhaegar watched them from a high balcony, the wind tugging at his hair. Another piece of the puzzle was in place, yet the greatest danger still lay within these walls. That night, Rhaegar visited Ned Stark again. He found the man standing, with the help of a cane, near the window of his chamber. The air was tinged with the scent of medicinal herbs. Ned turned when he heard Rhaegar's steps, offering a weary greeting. "I heard Stannis left, so it's done then." Rhaegar nodded. "Yes. We have peace with the Stormlands. That leaves the Vale, the Reach, and the North to formalize. The Reach has never openly rebelled, so they remain neutral. The Vale is uncertain, and the North is waiting for you." "Dane?" Ned's gaze traveled to the open window. "Then let's not delay. I can ride soon. I'm not at full strength, but if we wait for that, your father may change his mind." Rhaegar acknowledged the hard truth of that. "Arthur and I will escort you. A small company, no more. We'll slip out in a few days, giving the king some excuse. Perhaps that we must check on matters in Dorne. No grand procession, no official announcements." Ned's lips pressed together. "And from Dorne, we will travel to your tower and find my sister." Rhaegar exhaled. "Yes. She's there with a handful of trusted guardians. I will tell her you're coming. If she wishes to leave with you, she may. Or if she wishes to remain with me, we'll discuss how best to proceed. But I will not keep her from you." "Diet." For a moment, Ned's eyes glistened with emotion. Relief. Sorrow. A swirl of regrets. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. Then he steadied himself, leaning on the cane. "We do this carefully. And if your father tries to stop us?" Rhaegar looked out the window at the moonlit sky. "Then we do what must be done, though I pray it never comes to that." In the silence that followed, they both understood the unspoken truth. That the king might brand them traitors for leaving, or for reuniting the Starks. But Rhaegar refused to let fear of Eris's madness hold them hostage any longer. In the days that followed, Rhaegar orchestrated a subtle plan. He dropped hints that he would need to inspect the southern roads leading to Dorne to ensure no bandits troubled the Crown's travelers. A plausible excuse, though a flimsy one for traveling so far. He also arranged for a closed litter to carry Ned, so that the man could rest during the journey. Arthur Dayne confirmed which men could be trusted to go with them. No more than a dozen, sworn to Rhaegar personally, all of whom had served him loyally at the Trident. Meanwhile, Connington and Barristan would remain in King's Landing, continuing their quiet attempts to thwart any sudden wildfire plots. Varys, too, for all his slipperiness, remained behind. When at last the morning came for their departure, they readied themselves in the Red Keep stables. Horses were saddled, the litter readied. Ned emerged, pale but resolute, supported by Arthur on one side. Rhaegar donned a cloak of deep blue, rather than the Targaryen black and red, hoping to be less conspicuous on the roads. He carried only a light travel sword, though he suspected danger could lurk anywhere. Before mounting, he stepped aside with Connington one last time. If my father rages, tell him I am fulfilling his earlier command to ensure the Dornish roads are secure." Connington snorted lightly. "I doubt he'll like it, but I'll placate him with talk of the realm's safety. Be careful, Rhaegar. You go with few men, and if the king sets men after you—" Rhaegar laid a hand on Connington's shoulder. "We'll be swift and discreet. Take care of the city. Keep watch on the wildfire. If it seems he's preparing to ignite anything, send word by Raven at once." They clasped forearms. Rhaegar then turned to Ned, who managed to climb into the litter with help. Arthur and the others swung into their saddles. The small party rode out through the courtyard. Only a handful of onlookers were above, servants and a few low-born knights who bowed uncertainly. Rhaegar kept his head high, though tension rippled beneath his calm exterior. They passed through the city gates without incident. The gold cloaks recognized Rhaegar, but the rumor that he was off to handle highwaymen had apparently spread. The gates opened, and the horses clopped onto the open road. King's Landing fell behind them in a haze of dust and sunlit brick. Rhaegar felt the knot in his chest ease fractionally. He had always loved travel, the sense of possibility on the open road. But this was not the carefree journey of his youth. The king's threat hung over him like a hidden knife. Behind them, the city might be balancing on a knife's edge, with Ares prowling the halls. Ahead lay Dorne, where he would finally reunite Ned and Lyanna, and perhaps set the realm's final stage for peace. The first day's ride passed in uneasy calm. They kept to a moderate pace, ensuring Ned did not suffer too much jostling in the litter. The nights were crisp, the skies dotted with stars that seemed to stretch forever. Rhaegar often lay awake on his bedroll, gazing at those stars, thinking of the half-forgotten prophecy that had driven so many of his choices. He wondered if the realm's true salvation lay not in grand destinies, but in small acts of mercy and courage. Perhaps that was the real promise. Men and women choosing compassion over cruelty. On the fourth day, their party passed into the Dornish marches, where the air grew drier and the rocky hills rose around them. A faint memory stirred in Rhaegar of childhood visits to Sunspear with his mother. Now, though, the roads felt ominously empty. They encountered few travelers, only the occasional merchant caravan. Arthur Dayne, riding near the front, said little, but Rhaegar could tell he was alert, scanning every ridge for potential ambush. When they made camp that night, a brisk wind swept over the rocky terrain. Ned insisted on walking a few steps, leaning on his cane to stretch his sore muscles. Rhaegar helped him, guiding him around uneven stones. "I'll not be coddled," Ned muttered through gritted teeth, though he clearly needed the support. "If I can't manage a short walk, how will I ever sit a horse again?" Rhaegar offered a wry smile. "One step at a time. We'll be at the tower soon, and you'll see your sister. That thought alone might give you the strength to manage." "Mercy." Ned exhaled, the wind tugging at his hair. I've imagined what I'll say to her 1,000 times. And now that we're so close, I can't find the words." Rhaegar steadied him when his steps wavered. "Sometimes words aren't enough. The truth might unfold in silence. She's your sister. Your bond runs deeper than speech." Ned nodded, falling silent. Rhaegar sensed the swirl of emotions in the man. Hope, grief for what was lost, a measure of anger at the life that had been wrenched away. They finished their short circuit of the campsite and returned to the fire where Arthur stood watch. The other knights were huddled around separate small fires, cooking simple fare. Rhaegar and Ned settled down near the main fire. The stars glittered overhead, and for a moment the hush felt almost peaceful, as though the realm's troubles were far away. Arthur spoke softly. "We're about a day's ride from the tower. Shall we send a rider ahead to warn them of our arrival?" Rhaegar thought it over. "Yes, but only one. He should carry my personal sigil so the guards know it's no ruse. We don't want them to panic at the sight of an armed party." Arthur nodded, then glanced at Ned. "If you wish, Lord Stark, we can arrange for you to approach quietly, so as not to overwhelm your sister. She's been sequestered for some time." Ned gazed into the flames. "I'll follow your lead," he said. "I don't want to frighten her, or to storm in unannounced." A hush settled among them. Rhaegar realized it had been months since he'd last seen Lyanna. His heart pounded at the thought of reuniting, though the war had drained the color from all his old dreams. Did she still feel the same? Would she blame him for the rivers of blood spilled in her name? He recalled the last letter he'd received, how she'd lamented the rising hostilities, the fear in her mind that the realm would never accept their union. So much had changed since then. They rose before dawn, anxious to cover the last stretch of ground. Arthur dispatched the rider, a man named Joss, who knew the route to the Tower of Joy well enough. The rest of the company followed at a careful pace behind. The sun climbed higher, revealing the harsh beauty of the Dornish border. The craggy slopes, the sparse brush, the distant glimpses of red stone. Eventually, near midday, they came upon a winding path that curved around a barren hill. And there, perched like a lonely sentinel, stood the Tower of Joy. Its pale stone walls reflected the sunlight, and at its top, a high parapet jutted toward the sky. Rhaegar felt a tremor in his chest. This place held so many memories, the hush of secret conversations, the hush of a future once imagined. He glanced back at Ned, whose face was set in determination. A watchful tension gripped the entire party. Arthur signaled for half the knights to remain behind, out of immediate sight, while Rhaegar, Ned, and 2 knights approached closer. As they neared, the heavy wooden gates opened a crack. A familiar voice called out, "Who goes there?" Rhaegar recognized Ser Oswell Went's baritone. "It is I, Rhaegar," he replied, raising his voice. "We come in peace, with Lord Stark among us." A muffled exchange ensued behind the gate, and then it swung open fully. Ser Oswell stepped out, helmet under his arm, his expression both relieved and tense. "My prince," he said, bowing. "We had your rider Joss with us, but we were not sure if the king's men followed." He eyed Ned Stark warily. "We stand ready to defend the lady if need be." Ned met Oswell's gaze. "I'm not here to harm my sister." His voice was low, almost pained, as he leaned on his cane. "I only wish to see her." Ser Oswell looked to Rhaegar, who gave a firm nod. "It's all right, Oswell. We come as one. I assume Lyanna is within." Oswell stood aside, gesturing for them to enter. "She is. Be gentle with her, my lords. She's been waiting, but she's anxious." They passed through the courtyard of the small fortress, where the sun beat down on dusty stones. It was quiet, only a few men and 1 or 2 women who attended to Lyanna's needs. Rhaegar recognized a seamstress from Dorne, as well as a stable hand. He led Ned inside, up a short flight of steps. The air was cooler in the tower's interior, the stone thick enough to ward off the heat. They walked through a narrow corridor lit by slit windows. Rhaegar's heart pounded with each step. At last, they reached a broad wooden door. Arthur Dayne stayed behind with Ser Oswell, leaving Rhaegar and Ned alone. Rhaegar hesitated for a heartbeat, then knocked softly. A woman's voice answered, trembling slightly. "Come." Rhaegar pushed the door open, stepping into a small solar. The windows overlooked a sweeping view of Dornish hills. Cushions were strewn about, and a table held scattered parchments, half-finished embroidery, and a single blue winter rose in a simple vase of water. Lyanna stood near the window, wearing a loose gown of pale gray. Her long dark hair was unbound, falling around her shoulders, and her gray eyes flashed with a mix of emotions: relief, fear, anger, and something like heartbreak. When she saw Rhaegar, she let out a small exhalation. But then she saw Ned behind him, leaning on a cane, and her face crumpled. "Ned," she breathed, voice trembling. Ned stepped forward, though it cost him. Rhaegar moved aside, letting the siblings face each other. Lyanna's eyes brimmed with tears as she closed the distance. "You're hurt," she said softly, taking in his pallor, his stiff posture. Ned nodded, swallowing thickly. "A wound from the trident, but I'm alive. Thank the gods you're safe." She reached out, and Ned clasped her hands. They stood in silence for a moment, tears sliding quietly down Lyanna's cheek. Rhaegar watched, heart hammering, unsure if he ought to intervene or fade back. He sensed they needed this moment alone. At last, Ned pulled Lyanna into an embrace, awkward because of his cane, but genuine. Lyanna buried her face against his shoulder, sobbing softly. The months, the war, the fear, all of it poured out in that raw moment. Rhaegar backed away, giving them space. His own chest felt tight with emotion he could barely contain. This was what he had hoped for. That the war's grim legacy might be somewhat healed by love and reunion. But a flicker of guilt prodded him. He had been the catalyst for so much pain. After a time, Lyanna drew back, wiping her cheeks. She looked at Ned, a fragile smile on her lips. "I was so afraid you died. When Robert was killed, I feared the worst. He fought for me in a way, and for our father and Brandon." Newland. Ned's eyes darkened at the mention of the father and brother who'd been burned alive. "We all fought to stop the madness. But it's over, Lya. At least for now. The realm limps toward peace. And you... Are you all right here? Have you been treated kindly?" She glanced at Rhaegar, standing near the door. "He's been good to me," she said quietly. Then she turned back to Ned, the weight of sorrow in her gaze. "But I wish it hadn't come to war. Brandon, father, I can't bring them back." Ned nodded, tears threatening again. "No, Dot. We can only go forward." He swallowed, voice unsteady. "Come home with me, Lya. The North will welcome you. We can bury what happened. We can mend things." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Lyanna's face. "Ned, you must understand. I love him." She nodded toward Rhaegar, who felt a swell of emotion at the words. "I chose this. I never meant to spark rebellion, but I can't pretend it didn't happen." Ned's jaw tightened. If you stay with him, the North might never forgive. Especially with the king alive, after what he did to father. They'll see any union with Targaryens as betrayal. Lyanna closed her eyes. "I know. But if we simply go home as if none of this happened, do I remain betrothed to a dead man? Or do I hide away in Winterfell, ashamed?" Ned sighed, shoulders sagging. "I don't have all the answers, Lya. I only know I can't lose you again. If you wish to stay with Rhaegar, I'd like to see you both welcome in the North. But the old grudges run deep. Robert's vassals might despise it." Rhaegar found his voice, stepping forward. "We will not force you either way, Lyanna. If you want to return to Winterfell, I won't stop you, though my heart would break. If you wish to remain with me, I will do everything I can to ensure the North is not alienated. Our path won't be easy, but I promise you my devotion." "Now," Lyanna turned, eyes shining. "I gave you my heart already, Rhaegar. I want to stand by you, but I can't let my family be torn apart again." "Ned," she looked back to her brother. "Is there a world where the North can accept a Targaryen prince? If that prince proves he's not like his father?" Ned let out a weary breath. "Perhaps. If Rhaegar stands as the realm's true hope, if he curbs the king's madness and offers the North genuine respect, maybe, in time. But it will be a long road." "Man," Lyanna held Ned's gaze. "Then I'll walk it. Will you stand with me?" His eyes glistened. "You're my sister. I'll stand with you always." She exhaled in relief. Turning to Rhaegar, who approached cautiously, she offered him her hand. He took it, heart thudding. The three of them stood in a fraught circle, bound by blood, by love, and by the ghosts of Wardy. Outside the window, the sun hovered in a bright blue sky, oblivious to the turmoil below. For a moment, Rhaegar allowed himself to hope that this meeting marked the dawn of a new era, a fragile alliance bridging old hatreds. Lyanna asked, "What now?" Her voice trembled with the uncertainty of a woman who had lost so much faith in the realm's fairness. Rhaegar steadied her hand in his. "We decide together. If you remain with me, we must find a way to show the North that your choice is respected, not coerced. Ned can speak for us, help quell the rumor that you were kidnapped. We'll also need to broker a real peace with your kin, and that means dealing with King Aerys, or preventing him from harming the North again." Ned's voice was grim. "Easier said than done. My father's death still weighs heavily on the North. The Mad King's name is cursed there." Lyanna lifted her chin, a spark of steel in her eyes. "Then let them see that Rhaegar is not the Mad King's reflection. If the king cannot be controlled, we may have to." She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear enough. Either Ares must be contained, or the realm would never know peace. Rhaegar swallowed, feeling the gravity of what lay ahead. Yes, one step at a time. For now, let us rest here. Ned needs time to heal fully, and you two need time together to make sense of what has happened. Ned nodded, leaning a fraction more heavily on the cane. A few days, then we must plan. The North calls me back, and I cannot ignore it. Lyanna squeezed Ned's arm. I'll be here with you. I promise. Rhaegar gently placed a hand atop both theirs. Then we're together in this. We'll plan carefully. The realm stands on a knife's edge. But I believe, if we stand united, that we can forge a new path. The king's shadow won't be lifted easily, but we will not let it snuff out the future. Nayasi. They exchanged a shared breath, one that felt like a vow. Beyond the tower's window, the sunlight bathed the rocky hills, turning them golden. Within the solar, 3 lives converged, shaped by war, guided by love, and tethered to the fate of an entire kingdom. In that moment, a fragile hope blossomed, that perhaps the tragedies behind them would not define the days ahead, that the songs once sung of a better tomorrow might yet find an echo in the living world. And so they stood, hearts pounding, poised on the cusp of the next chapter of the realm's story. A chapter they would write with hands still stained by war, yet determined to grasp at any sliver of peace.